When Shaquille O'Neal picked up his phone on a regular Tuesday morning in March 2024, he had no idea his entire world was about to change. He was sitting in his Atlanta studio. He had a podcast to record, a meeting at 1 o'clock, a protein shake going cold on his desk. Normal things. Big man, normal Tuesday. Then his phone buzzed. The number was not saved in his contacts, but the area code stopped him cold. New Orleans. He had not seen that area code in a very long time. Something in his chest tightened before his brain even caught up to why. He let it ring once, twice. Then something made him pick up. The voice on the other end was not who he expected. It was a woman named Claudette. And she said 5 words that changed everything. "Renata needs to see you." Now here is what you need to understand. Shaquille O'Neal had been famous for over 30 years. He had won 4 NBA championships. He had made over $300 million. He had been interviewed thousands of times by thousands of people. And in all of those interviews across all of those years, he had never once mentioned a girl named Renata, not once. Because some things are too real for interviews. Renata Josephine Thireault was a nurse living in New Orleans, in the same neighborhood where she had always lived. She had survived Hurricane Katrina. She had rebuilt her life. She had kept going the way strong people keep going, quietly and without applause. She had also never married, not in 22 years. 3 good men had gotten down on one knee for her. 3 times she had said no. And nobody, not her friends, not her co-workers, not the men who loved her, ever fully understood why, until now. Because what Renata had been keeping for 22 years was not bitterness. It was not obsession. It was not some broken heart that never healed. It was something so quietly beautiful, so deeply human, that when Shaquille O'Neal finally found out the truth, the biggest man in basketball history went completely silent. His hands dropped to his sides. His voice disappeared entirely. The man who had never been speechless in his life had nothing left to say. So what was it? What did Renata keep inside a worn-out shoebox for over 2 decades? What was written on that piece of red construction paper at the bottom of the box? And what was the real reason she could never say yes to anyone who asked her to stay? The answer is the last thing you would ever expect. And it is waiting for you in this video. Stay right here. Because this story is about to change the way you think about love, sacrifice, and what it really means to protect someone you care about, even when it costs you everything. Before the first chapter even begins, here is what you need to know. Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq, a man who stood 7 feet 1 inch tall and won 4 NBA championships, a man who made over $300 million and was loved by millions, came face to face with a woman he had walked away from 22 years ago. And when she told him why she never married anyone else, the biggest man in basketball history stood completely still. His hands, which had palmed thousands of basketballs, dropped to his sides. His voice, which had filled arenas from Los Angeles to Miami, disappeared entirely. The reason she waited was not what anyone expected. Not jealousy, not obsession, not bitterness. It was something so quietly beautiful, so deeply human, that it will stay with you long after you finish reading. It was a Tuesday in March 2024, not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a Tuesday that looked any different from the outside than any other cold coffee, back-to-back meetings, Atlanta traffic kind of Tuesday. The sky over Georgia was the flat, pale blue of early spring. The city was already humming. Cars on I-285, construction crews on Peachtree, coffee shops full of people staring at laptops, solving problems that felt enormous until they didn't. Nobody would remember this Tuesday for any reason except what happened at 11:47 in the morning. Shaquille O'Neal was sitting in his recording studio on the north side of Atlanta, Georgia, the same city where he had quietly, methodically built his business empire after hanging up his NBA jersey for the last time in 2011. The studio was a big room, which it needed to be. Shaq did not fit comfortably into small rooms. There were soundproofed walls and good speakers, and a microphone that had been specially mounted, higher than any standard microphone stand. Because standard microphone stands were not built with Shaq in mind. Very little in the world was built with Shaq in mind, and he had made his peace with this decades ago. He had a podcast to record at noon. He had a meeting with his business team at 1 p.m. to talk about a new investment he was considering in a tech company based in Austin. He had a phone call with his mother, Lucille, scheduled for 3 p.m. because he called his mother every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. Had done so for years. Because Lucille O'Neill raised him right, and he knew it. He had a protein shake on his desk that had been cold for 40 minutes because he had gotten distracted reading game film from the 2001 NBA Finals. Not for any professional reason, just because sometimes you go looking for one thing on your phone and end up somewhere else entirely. Normal things. Big man, normal Tuesday. His phone buzzed. The number was not saved in his contacts. He looked at it the way everyone looks at unknown numbers now, with the mild, tired suspicion of a person who has received too many robocalls about extended car warranties. His thumb hovered over the decline button. Then he saw the area code. New Orleans. He had not seen a 504 area code on his phone in a very long time. Not in years. Long enough that seeing it now produced something physical. A tightening somewhere in the middle of his chest. The way your body sometimes knows a thing before your mind catches up to it. He let it ring twice. A long pause between the first ring and the second. The kind of pause where a person makes a decision. Then he picked up, "Hello." The voice on the other end was not hers. He knew that immediately. In the first syllable. He knew because he had not forgotten her voice. Had not forgotten it despite 30 years and 4 championships and 200 million frequent flyer miles and every single loud, dazzling, exhausting thing that had filled the space between then and now. He had not forgotten it. And this voice on the phone was not it. This was a woman named Claudette Barras. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Claudette Barras. He had not heard that name since he was 19 years old. Sitting in the bleachers of the Pete Maravich Assembly Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with a phone number written on the inside of his wrist in blue ink because he did not have paper and he was not going to risk losing it. Claudette was the older sister, the watchful one, the one who had looked at him at that crawfish boil in the Treme with the calm, measuring eyes of a woman who had seen plenty of large, charming young men come around her little sister before and was not yet convinced this one was different. Claudette Barras was calling him on a Tuesday in March 2024. She said 5 words. "Renata needs to see you." Shaq gripped the phone. The protein shake stayed cold. Claudette was a careful speaker, had always been, even back then. She chose words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, deliberately, without waste. She explained the situation in the measured, even tone of a woman who had thought about exactly what she was going to say and exactly how she was going to say it. Probably for longer than just this morning. Renata was not sick. She was not dying. She was not in any trouble that needed fixing or any danger that needed addressing. She was actually doing fine, Claudette said, and she paused for exactly 1 beat after the word fine. A pause so brief that most people would not have noticed it at all. Shaq noticed it. He had played basketball at the highest level for 19 years, and he had learned to read pauses. That particular pause said, "Fine means something complicated right now, and I don't have time to explain the whole complication on the phone." Renata was living in the Treme, still after all these years, still in the same neighborhood where she had grown up, still on Ursulines Avenue, still 2 blocks from Congo Square, in one of the oldest African-American communities in the entire United States. A neighborhood that had been playing jazz before jazz had a name. A neighborhood that sent its dead off with brass bands and dancing because grief and celebration were never entirely separate things in the Treme, and everyone who grew up there understood that. Renata had been there in August 2005, when Hurricane Katrina made landfall, and the levees failed and the water rose, and the city broke open. She had stayed. She had rebuilt. She had kept her head down and her hands working, and she had kept going, the way the Treme itself kept going, which was the only way either of them knew how. And in all that time, through Katrina and the rebuilding and the 22 years during which Shaquille O'Neal had become one of the most recognizable human beings on the surface of the earth, she had never married. Claudette said she was not supposed to tell him that part. She said it clearly, with the self-awareness of a person who knows they are breaking a rule and has decided the rule no longer applies. She told him anyway, because she was an older sister, and older sisters sometimes decide that enough time has passed and enough silence has been kept, and enough is, finally, enough. Shaq sat in his big recording chair in his big Atlanta studio, and he did not say anything for a moment. Outside, through the soundproofed walls, Atlanta kept going. The construction crews, the coffee shops, the cars on I-285. "I'll come," he said. He meant it the way he meant things when they came from somewhere deep, not a polite answer, not a famous person's automatic yes, but a real one. The kind you make before you think it through, because thinking it through is not the point. He canceled the podcast recording. He sent a text to his business team about the 1 p.m. He called his mother at 3 p.m. as always, and he talked about everything except the 504 area code. Because some things you are not ready to say out loud yet. He poured the protein shake down the sink. He opened his laptop and booked a flight from Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport to Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport. Saturday morning. Direct. He chose the window seat the way he always did, even though the window seat on a standard commercial aircraft gave him approximately the same comfort as sitting in a child's lunchbox. He sat back. His recording studio was quiet. The microphone was still waiting. The soundproofed walls held everything in. Why now? He thought. 22 years of silence. 22 years of nothing. No call, no message, no word through any of the 1,000 channels that a person as famous as Shaq generates. All the people and pathways and gossip networks that fan out from a life lived entirely in public. 22 years of her choosing silence so completely that he had eventually, gradually, carefully stopped wondering. And now, 5 words on a Tuesday in March. "Renata needs to see you." He looked at the window. Atlanta's pale blue sky sat unchanged above the city, unimpressed with the weight of the moment, the way skies always are. Why now? He did not have an answer. The answer was in New Orleans, sitting in the Treme neighborhood, 2 blocks from Congo Square, in a house on Ursulines Avenue. Saturday felt like a very long time away. Why had Renata Josephine Turode, after 22 years of keeping him out of her life so perfectly and so completely, decided that now was the time to let him back in? He was about to find out, and the answer would be the last thing he expected. The thing about memory is that it does not store itself neatly. It does not file itself away in chronological order like a well-organized cabinet. Oldest in the back, newest in the front, everything labeled and accessible. Memory is messier than that, more human than that. It stores itself by feeling, by smell, by the particular quality of light on a specific afternoon that your brain decided, without asking your permission, to keep forever. Shaquille O'Neal had 30 years of memories that the whole world shared with him. The dunk on Patrick Ewing, the three-peat with the Lakers, the night in Miami in June 2006 when he held the championship trophy, and the tears came before he could stop them, and he stopped trying to stop them. These memories belonged to everyone who had watched, which was nearly everyone. But there was a different set of memories that belonged only to him. And on the flight from Atlanta to New Orleans on that Saturday morning in March 2024, sitting in a window seat that was losing the argument with his left shoulder. Those were the memories that came. It started with a drive. April 1991. A Saturday afternoon. The kind of Louisiana Saturday that smells like cut grass and coming rain, and something frying somewhere that you cannot identify but would very much like to find. Shaq was 20 years old, a sophomore at LSU, already the most talked-about college basketball player in the country. The NBA scouts were already coming to Baton Rouge, already sitting in the upper sections of the Pete Maravich Assembly Center, with their clipboards and their careful eyes, writing things down. He drove to New Orleans with two teammates, Vernell Singleton and a big, quiet freshman named Darius Polk, who barely spoke but laughed at everything. They were going to a crawfish boil in the Treme, at the house of someone's cousin, the exact nature of the connection already lost to the casual geography of college social life, where everyone is somehow connected to everyone else, through a chain of cousins and teammates and people from back home. They parked on St. Claude Avenue and followed the sound of a brass band, because in the Treme, you always follow the sound of a brass band, and it will take you somewhere worth going. The boil was in a backyard off Ursulines. Long folding tables covered in newspaper, mountains of red crawfish, corn and potatoes and andouille sausage, cold drinks in metal tubs of ice. Maybe 40 people spread across the yard and the back porch and the narrow strip of side yard where someone had set up a speaker playing bounce music between the live band sets. Shaq walked in, and the usual thing happened. People noticed. People pointed. A few came over immediately. He smiled and shook hands, and did the thing he had already learned to do at 20, which was be present and warm and generous with his attention, while some separate, quieter part of himself stood slightly to the side and watched. That quieter part of himself was the one that noticed her. She was standing at the far end of the main table, near the biggest pot, and she was in an argument. Not a mean argument, a passionate one, the kind people have about things that genuinely matter to them, where the hands move and the volume rises, and the face becomes entirely unguarded, because the subject at hand is too important for self-consciousness. She was arguing with her cousin, a stocky young man named Percival who kept shaking his head, about whether the crawfish needed more cayenne pepper. Her position, which she was defending with the full force of her conviction, was yes, significantly more. The pot was under-seasoned, and everyone could see it, and she did not understand why this was a debate. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall. She was wearing a yellow sundress with small white flowers on it. Her hair was pulled back except for 2 pieces that had escaped near her temples, and were doing whatever they wanted, which seemed consistent with her general approach to the cayenne argument. She had the particular kind of beauty that does not announce itself, that you have to look at for a moment before it becomes undeniable. And then once it is undeniable, you cannot understand how you didn't see it immediately. She was not paying any attention to Shaq. This was, in his experience, extraordinary. He had grown up being noticed. Even before the fame, even as a child, he had been noticed. The too tall kid, the one who didn't fit the desk, the one teachers called on partly because they could always find him in the room. He had spent his entire life being the thing that people's eyes moved to first. It was not something he was proud of or ashamed of. It was simply the condition of his existence, like weather. Renata Josephine Thureau glanced at him once. It was a complete glance, full, calm, unhurried, the kind of look that actually takes in what it is looking at, rather than just recording the fact of a famous person's presence. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then she turned back to Percival and the cayenne situation, which was apparently more pressing. Shaq walked to the table. He looked at the pot. He looked at Percival. He looked at Renata. "She's right," he said. "It needs more cayenne." Renata did not look up immediately. When she did, her expression was not the one he expected. It was not starstruck. It was not even particularly impressed. It was the expression of someone who has just received information that is correct but unsolicited. "I did not ask a giant stranger for his opinion," she said. "But since you're here, yes, I am right. Thank you. You can go." Vernell, standing behind Shaq, made a sound that was half laugh and half warning. Darius Polk, the big quiet freshman who laughed at everything, laughed at this. Shaq did not go. He picked up the cayenne from the table and handed it to her. She took it without breaking eye contact, with the self-possession of a person who has been raised to know exactly who she is, and shook a generous amount into the pot. "You're Shaquille O'Neal," she said. It was not a question, and it was not an exclamation. It was simply an identification, the way you might identify a weather pattern or a street name. "Yeah," he said. "Renata Turod," she said, and offered her hand. He shook it. His hand swallowed hers entirely, which happened every time he shook anyone's hand, but somehow this time it registered differently. The size difference was almost comical, and they both noticed it at the same moment, and they both smiled at the same moment, and that simultaneous smile was the thing that began everything. They talked for 4 hours. The brass band finished its first set and started its second. Percival gave up on the cayenne argument and went to talk to someone else. The sun moved across the sky in the slow, generous way it moves in Louisiana, not rushing toward evening, taking its time. The crawfish disappeared plate by plate. People drifted in and out of conversations around them, and Shaq and Renata stayed in theirs like two people who had found a pocket of stillness inside the noise and were not ready to leave it. She asked him questions that nobody asked him. Not about basketball statistics or the NBA draft or what it was like to be famous. She asked him what it was like to move so many times as a kid. Newark, then San Antonio, then Germany, then Georgia. All because his stepfather, Philip Harrison, was an Army sergeant, and the Army went where it went, and the family followed. She asked him what it felt like to carry a body this size through a world designed for smaller people. She asked him if he was ever lonely in crowds, which was such a precise and unexpected question that he did not answer it right away. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "A lot." She nodded. Not with pity, with recognition, as though she had suspected this and was simply confirming it. She told him about the Treme. 3 generations of her family in this neighborhood, her grandmother Celestine, who had been born in the house on Ursulines Avenue and still lived there at 74, who made the best red beans and rice in New Orleans, which was saying something significant in a city where that dish was taken with absolute seriousness. She told him about Delgado Community College, where she was studying nursing, because she had decided at 15 that the most useful thing a person could do with their life was know how to help someone who was hurt. She told him about the second-line parades she had grown up dancing in, the particular footwork, the way the whole neighborhood moved together like one living thing. She was the most interesting person he had talked to in months. He drove back to Baton Rouge at midnight with Vernell and Darius, who had the good sense not to say much on the drive home. He had her phone number, written on an actual piece of paper this time, torn from a notebook her cousin had in his back pocket, because Shaq had learned his lesson about wrists and ink. He called her the next morning at 9. She picked up on the second ring. What followed was 8 months of something that did not have a clean name then and does not have one now. Weekend drives down I-10 from Baton Rouge to New Orleans and back. Phone calls that started after 10 p.m. and ended when the sky outside started going gray. Crawfish at Dookie Chase's restaurant on Orleans Avenue, the famous one. The one where Leah Chase had been cooking since 1946, and where the food tasted like someone genuinely loved you. Walking along the Mississippi River levee at Algiers Point on a Sunday afternoon, the city spread out across the water, Shaq's shadow stretching long in the evening sun, and Renata's shadow stretching beside it, small and dark and steady. He brought her to one game. One. She sat in the stands at the Pete Maravich Assembly Center in November 1991 and watched him play. And afterward she said that she understood now why people went crazy for it. The speed of it, the controlled chaos, the way he moved for someone that large. But that she preferred watching him when he was just a person, not a performance. He thought about that for a long time afterward. She was the first person who had ever made him feel like the enormous, glittering freight train of his future did not have to be the only thing about him. That inside the famous body, the famous laugh, the famous dunks and the famous smile, there was just a man from Newark who had moved too many times and sometimes felt lonely in crowds. She saw that man without him having to explain him. And then December 1991 arrived. He declared for the 1992 NBA draft. The announcement was not a surprise to anyone who followed college basketball. It was inevitable, and everyone knew it was inevitable, including Shaq, including Renata. They talked about it. He told her he wanted to make it work. She said she wanted that too. They both meant it. On June 24, 1992, the Orlando Magic selected Shaquille O'Neal with the first overall pick in the NBA draft. The moment was broadcast on national television. He wore a suit and shook David Stern's hand and held up the Magic jersey and smiled the smile that was about to become one of the most recognized smiles on earth. In the Treme, on Ursulines Avenue, Renata Josephine Thoreau watched it on her grandmother Celestine's television. She called him that night. He answered. They talked for 2 hours, and the conversation was warm and real, and it skirted around the edges of a truth that neither of them was quite ready to say directly. They were 20 years old and 21 years old, respectively. He was about to move to Orlando. She was in New Orleans. The distance was not just miles. It was the distance between one kind of life and a completely different kind. Two trajectories that had briefly touched and were now, unmistakably, moving apart. By the end of 1992, the calls had thinned from weekly to occasional to nothing. No fight, no betrayal, no phone call where hard things were said. Just the quiet, gradual, heartbreaking mathematics of two lives that had stopped adding up to the same number. He had thought about her. Over the years, he would not pretend otherwise. In the odd private moment between one enormous thing and the next, he had thought about that crawfish boil and the Cayenne argument, and the way she had looked at him like he was just a man. He had wondered, in the vague way you wonder about roads not taken, what had happened to her. He had never once imagined the actual answer. The plane began its descent into New Orleans. Through the window, the city appeared below, the river making its famous crescent bend, the neighborhoods laid out in their grid, the Treme sitting right where it had always sat, small from up here, permanent looking, the kind of place that has survived enough that it no longer worries about surviving. Shaq pressed his forehead lightly against the cool glass. 22 years, he was about to find out what they contained. He did not know. As the wheels touched the runway at Louis Armstrong International and the cabin filled with the sound of seatbelts unclicking, that the answer was not in the past at all. The answer was 21 years old. The answer was 6 feet 9 inches tall. And the answer was, at that exact moment, shooting free throws alone in a gymnasium at Xavier University of Louisiana, wearing number 33, with hands the exact size and shape of his father's. The world did not miss a single moment of Shaquille O'Neal's life after June 24, 1992. It could not have, even if it had tried. He was too large for that. Not just physically, though the physical was undeniable. 7 feet 1 inch of him, 325 pounds at his playing weight, a body that engineers had not accounted for when they designed locker rooms and airplane seats and hotel shower heads and the rims of basketball hoops, which he bent on 4 separate documented occasions simply by holding them too hard in the aftermath of a dunk. He was too large in every sense. Too loud, too bright, too much of everything that makes a person impossible to look away from. The Orlando Magic years came first, 1992 through 1996. He averaged over 23 points a game in his rookie season. He made the All-Star team. He made commercials. He made a rap album, Shaq Diesel, released in October 1993, which went platinum, because of course it did. Because nothing Shaq did in those years went any other way. He was everywhere. Magazine covers and morning shows and highlight reels and tabloids. The freight train had not just arrived. It had become the whole railroad. Then Los Angeles. The Lakers trade in 1996. The purple and gold. The partnership with a 20-year-old guard named Kobe Bryant that was electric and combustible in equal measure. Two forces of nature sharing a locker room and a city and a championship ambition. The tension between them as much a part of the story as the winning. 3 straight NBA championships from 2000 to 2002. The Finals MVP each time. The dynasty years. The ones that people in Los Angeles still talk about the way people talk about things that defined the place where they grew up. The world watched all of it. The trade to the Miami Heat in 2004. The championship on June 20, 2006. At the American Airlines Arena, the one that made him cry in public. The tears coming in the post-game chaos before he could locate the composure to stop them, and then deciding not to stop them, letting the cameras see it, because some moments are too real for composure. The Phoenix Suns. The Cleveland Cavaliers, where he briefly played alongside LeBron James, and the pairing felt like a science fiction scenario made real. The Boston Celtics. The retirement announcement on June 1, 2011, delivered via Twitter, which was exactly the right amount of modern and irreverent for the way Shaq did things. Then, the years that came after. The doctorate in education from Barry University in Miami in 2012. Because Lucille O'Neal had told her son to finish what he started. And Shaq finished what he started. The television work. Inside the NBA on TNT, where he sat next to Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith and Ernie Johnson and was funnier than anyone had a right to be, while also being genuinely insightful in ways that surprised people who expected only the performance. The business empire built in Atlanta. Restaurants, real estate, a car wash chain, investments in companies that most people had not heard of yet but would, because Shaq had an instinct for these things that he had spent his post-playing years sharpening into something precise. The marriage to Shawnee Nelson in December 2002. The children, Sharif, Amira, Shakir, Mayara, and also Miles and Tahira. The divorce from Shawnee in 2011. The public relationships that played out in the columns of gossip sites and the comment sections of social media, with the exhausting, overlit quality of all famous people's personal lives. An enormous life. A loud, colorful, fully documented, endlessly photographed, thoroughly analyzed life. The world had seen every inch of it. In the Treme, on Ursulines Avenue, Renata Josephine Toureau lived a life that the world saw none of. She finished her nursing degree at Delgado Community College in the spring of 1993. She was 20 years old and she was a mother, and she had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours since November of the previous year, but she finished. She walked across that stage and she took that certificate and she held it the way you hold something that cost you more than anyone watching could possibly know. The pregnancy had not been announced, had not been broadcast, had not been processed publicly in any of the 1,000 ways that people process difficult things now, in the age of social media confessions and online communities and strangers offering support through a screen. It had been private, kept inside the house on Ursulines Avenue, inside the circle of Claudette and their mother Marguerite and their grandmother Celestine, who was 75 years old and had seen enough of life to respond to the news with something close to serenity. Celestine had taken Renata's hands in hers, small, dry hands, the hands of a woman who had cooked red beans and rice every Monday for 60 years, without exception. and said something in the Louisiana Creole French that had been her first language before English, something that translated roughly to, "A child is never the wrong answer to the question life is asking." Renata had held on to that. She had held on to it through the morning sickness and the sleepless nights, and the specific loneliness of being 20 years old and pregnant, and watching the father of your child become the most talked about person in American sports in real time, his face on the television in your grandmother's living room, his name in every sports conversation in every barbershop and sports bar and college campus in the country. She had made the decision deliberately, and she had made it alone. She was not going to call him. The reasoning was not simple, and it was not without grief. She had sat with it for weeks, through the December of 1992 and the January of 1993, turning it over in her mind the way you turn something fragile over in your hands, carefully, from every angle, trying to understand what it was before you decided what to do with it. Shaq was 21 years old. He had just been drafted first overall. The pressure on him was already immense, not just to perform, but to justify the expectations of an entire franchise, an entire fan base, an entire sport that had decided he was the next transformative figure in its history. He had a mother who counted on him, a stepfather who had sacrificed for him. He had everything ahead of him, and the weight of it was already visible in the careful, slightly guarded way he talked in interviews, the way young men talk when they know the stakes are very high and they cannot afford to stumble. Renata had asked herself one question, and she had asked it honestly, without self-pity and without the distortion of what she wanted the answer to be. What happens to this child if I call? She had thought through every version. The version where Shaq did the right thing and came back to New Orleans, where the pressure of fatherhood and the pressure of being Shaq in his first NBA season collided and something broke under the weight. The version where lawyers got involved and the story became public and her child grew up as a headline. The version where Shaq resented the news and it poisoned something between them before it could become anything real. The version, and this one was the hardest to sit with, where he was wonderful about it and tried his best, and the distance and the demands of his life made wonderful not enough. None of the versions were clean. The cleanest version, the one that protected the child most completely, was the one where the child simply grew up in the Treme, loved and known and grounded in a place that had 3 generations of their family in it, raised by a mother who was going to be a nurse, and a grandmother who made red beans every Monday, and a great-grandmother who spoke Creole French, and understood that a child was never the wrong answer. She chose that version. She named him Isidore Tremaine Thiraud, after her grandfather on her mother's side, Isidore, which was the name of a saint and also an old name, a Treme name, the kind of name that carried history in it. Everyone called him Izzy from the first week, because Isidore was a large name for a small baby. And then the small baby grew into a boy, and the boy grew into something that was no longer small at all, and the name Izzy stayed, because names that stick in the first week tend to stay forever. Izzy walked at 11 months. He talked early, full sentences before he was 2, with the particular verbal confidence of a child who has adults around him who take his words seriously. He was, from the beginning, a person who paid attention, who watched, who stored things up quietly and then produced them at unexpected moments with a precision that made Renata laugh and Claudette shake her head and Marguerite say he had his great-grandfather Isidore's mind, which was the highest compliment she could offer. He got tall at 9. Not gradually tall the way most children get tall, dramatically tall, suddenly tall. He went in for his annual checkup in September 2011. He was 8 turning 9, and the pediatrician measured him and wrote the number down, measured him again, because doctors do that when the number seems unlikely. He was 4 feet 10 inches. In the 3rd grade, Renata looked at the number on the chart. She looked at her son, who was sitting on the paper-covered examination table, eating a grape lollipop with the calm self-possession he had inherited from her, swinging his legs, which were already long enough that they nearly reached the floor. She said nothing. She smiled at the pediatrician. She helped Izzy put his shoes back on. In the car on the way home, Izzy said, "Am I going to keep getting that tall?" Renata kept her eyes on the road. "Probably," she said. "How tall do you think?" She thought about hands that swallowed everything they held. She thought about a laugh that filled rooms. She thought about a shadow stretching long on the Algiers Point levee in the November evening light. "Very," she said. Izzy considered this. Then he said, "Cool," and went back to the lollipop. By the time he was 12, he was 5 feet 8, and the basketball coach at his middle school had called Renata twice. By 14, he was 6 feet 2, and being watched by the high school coaches at 2 different schools. By 16, he was 6 feet 6, and Xavier University of Louisiana had sent a letter, an actual physical letter, which arrived in the mailbox on Ursulines Avenue like something from another era, expressing early interest. He was a good basketball player in the way that is hard to manufacture and impossible to fake. The instincts were natural. The court vision was extraordinary. He had his father's physical tools, the reach, the hands, the wingspan that made opposing coaches diagram extra defensive schemes. But he played with a patience and a strategic intelligence that were entirely his mother's contribution. He did not force things. He waited for the right moment, and then he was decisive. His coach at Xavier, a meticulous man named Bernard Arsenault, who had been coaching college ball for 21 years and had seen every kind of player there was, said in a staff meeting during Izzy's sophomore year that the boy played like someone who understood that basketball was a thinking game that happened to require an unusual body. He averaged 14 points and 9 rebounds per game in his junior season. He wore number 33. The thing about living in the Treme is that the neighborhood holds you, not possessively, not in the way that limits or constrains. It holds you the way a good family holds you, with enough room to move, enough roots to return to, enough history around you that you understand without being told that you are part of something larger than yourself. Izzy grew up understanding this. He went to second-line parades and knew the footwork. He ate his great-great-grandmother Celestine's red beans and rice every Monday until Celestine passed in 2003, when Izzy was 2 years old and would not remember her face, but would somehow always associate the smell of red beans cooking with safety. He watched the neighborhood flood in 2005, when he was 3, from the second floor of the Ursulines' house with Renata and Marguerite. The water coming up to the porch steps before it stopped, their block one of the fortunate ones, and then spent the next years of his childhood watching the neighborhood rebuild itself with the stubborn, unhurried determination of people who had been through worse. He knew he did not have a father in the house. He had known this the way children know the shape of their own lives, not with drama, but with the matter-of-fact clarity of lived experience. His mother was enough, more than enough. She was the person who came to every game and sat in the second row with her arms folded and her eyes tracking his footwork with the same precision she tracked her patient's vital signs. She was the person who sat with him at the kitchen table and helped him with the algebra he struggled with and the history essays he loved. She was the person who, when he was 15 and going through the particular turbulence of 15, had looked him directly in the eyes and said, "I am always, always on your side, even when I tell you that you are wrong." He trusted her completely. So when she told him, at age 7, that his father was someone she had known a long time ago, that it was complicated, that she would explain more when he was older, he accepted it. When she added more at 10, a few more details, careful ones, the kind you give a 10-year-old, he accepted that too. When he was 16 and asked directly for the first time if his father knew he existed, and Renata had said quietly and honestly that no, he did not. Izzy had been still for a long moment. Then he had nodded, in the way he nodded when he was processing something, storing it, deciding what it meant. Okay, he had said. He had not asked again for 5 years, until 3 weeks before Shaq's flight landed in New Orleans. It was a Sunday evening in late February 2024. Renata was in the kitchen making a late dinner after a 12-hour shift at University Medical Center. She was tired in the deep, specific way that nurses are tired. Not just in the body, but in the particular part of the mind that had been making decisions and tracking details and holding other people's emergencies for 12 consecutive hours. She was still in her scrubs. She was making rice because rice required the least thinking. Izzy came in from practice. He was 21 years old and 6 feet 9 inches tall, and he had to duck slightly to avoid the low shelf Renata had put up near the kitchen doorway years ago and had never moved because she had forgotten, over time, that it was at a height that was only inconvenient for one specific person. He sat down at the kitchen table. He put his gym bag on the floor. He looked at his mother's back for a moment. Then he said, "Mama, I think I need to know his name." Renata did not drop the spoon. She was a nurse. Her hands were steady by professional training and personal disposition. But something shifted in the kitchen, in the quality of the air, in the particular silence between the words he had said and the words she was going to say. She turned off the burner. She turned around. She looked at her son, this tall, quiet, serious young man with his grandfather's name and his father's hands and his own particular intelligence that belonged to nobody but himself. And she felt the 21 years of her decision all at once. The weight of it and the rightness of it, and also, for the first time, the sense that its time was ending. A European scout had come to 3 of Izzy's games in the last month. There were conversations happening about leagues in Spain and France. Izzy's basketball future was taking on a real shape, a professional shape, and with it had come something Renata had been watching build in him for months, a need for the full picture of himself. Not out of anger or grievance, out of the simple, legitimate human requirement of knowing where you come from before you decide where you are going. She had known this moment was approaching. She had not known it would feel this clean. "Give me 3 weeks," she said. Izzy looked at her. He had her eyes, the steady, assessing ones that saw things fully before they reacted to them. "Okay," he said. He picked up his gym bag. He went to his room. He did not ask what 3 weeks meant because he trusted her, and she had told him it would be handled. And for Isidore Tremaine Turode, that had always been enough. Renata stood in the kitchen on Ursulines Avenue, the rice still sitting uncooked in the pot, the quiet of the Treme coming in through the kitchen window, a distant trumpet, a dog, the sound of the neighborhood existing the way it had always existed. And she thought about a phone number she had not dialed in 22 years. Then she thought about Claudette. She thought about Claudette for 3 days before deciding. And then she called her. 48 hours later, without Renata's knowledge, Claudette Barras picked up her phone and dialed a number she had spent 2 days looking for through channels that older sisters know how to navigate when they decide that something must be done. The phone rang twice in a recording studio in Atlanta, Georgia, and on the 3rd ring, Shaquille O'Neal picked up. The wheels of the Delta flight touched the runway at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport at 9:14 on a Saturday morning in March 2024. The cabin filled with the ordinary sounds of arrival, seatbelts unclicking, overhead bins opening, the collective shuffle and compression of people reorganizing themselves back into individuals after 2 hours of existing in the temporary community of shared air travel. The flight attendant said something cheerful over the intercom about the local time and the temperature outside. 68 degrees, clear skies, a beautiful March morning in New Orleans, the kind the city produces in the weeks before the serious heat arrives, as if offering proof that it can be gentle when it chooses. Shaq waited for the aisle to clear before he stood. This was habit, standing up in an airplane aisle, while other passengers were still gathered in it, was an experience he had stopped inflicting on both himself and others, sometime around 1995. He waited. He looked out the window at the flat Louisiana landscape surrounding the airport, the low scrub grass, some boats in the distance, the sky enormous and pale and absolutely indifferent to everything happening beneath it. He had not slept on the plane. He had tried. He had put on headphones and closed his eyes and done the thing people tell you to do, which is breathe slowly and let your mind go quiet. His mind had not gone quiet. His mind had spent the 2-hour flight conducting a conversation with itself that went in circles, returning always to the same questions that had no answers yet. Why now? After 22 years, why now? What is in New Orleans that has been in New Orleans for 22 years and is now, apparently, the reason? He had not arrived at any answers. The aisle cleared. He stood up, absorbed the familiar comedy of his head, connecting with the overhead compartment, and retrieved his bag. He moved through the cabin toward the exit, passengers stepping aside in the unconscious way people step aside for Shaq in confined spaces. Not rudely, just instinctively, the way you step aside for anything very large that is moving in your direction. The flight attendant at the door said, "Have a wonderful visit, Mr. O'Neill." He said, "Thank you, baby," which was what he said to everyone, always, and meant every time. Claudette was waiting at the arrivals level in a 12-year-old silver Honda Accord that she had parked in a no-stopping zone with the calm authority of a woman who has been parking in no-stopping zones her entire adult life and has never once received a consequence for it. She was 61 years old. She was wearing a green cardigan and reading glasses pushed up into her silver-streaked hair, and the expression of a person who has decided to do a complicated thing and is committed to it, consequences pending. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall, which meant that when Shaq arrived at the curb with his bag and she stepped forward to greet him, the visual was approximately what it would look like if a sparrow decided to hug a building. She hugged him anyway, thoroughly. Then, she stepped back and looked up at him with the direct, unhurried assessment of a woman who spent 30 years teaching 6th grade and developed, over those 30 years, an ability to look at a person and determine within approximately 45 seconds what they were made of and whether they were going to be a problem. She appeared to be running that assessment now. "You look old," she said. "I'm 52, he said. "I know how old you are," she said. "I looked you up. You have a Wikipedia page the length of a novel." She picked up her car keys. "Come on. Don't stand there blocking the sidewalk." He folded himself into the passenger seat of the Honda Accord. The seat was adjusted for a person of Claudette's dimensions, which meant it was positioned in a way that left Shaq's knees approximately level with the dashboard and his head in a relationship with the ceiling that could only be described as intimate. He did not complain. He had learned, 52 years into living in this body, that complaining about the size of other people's cars was a complaint without a resolution. Claudette pulled into traffic with the confidence of someone who has been navigating New Orleans streets for 6 decades and has made her peace with all of them. "She doesn't know I called you," Claudette said. She said it the way she had said everything so far, directly, without preamble, as though the words had been waiting by the door and simply needed permission to leave. Shaq turned to look at her. "She doesn't know I'm coming?" "She knows you're coming. I told her you called and said you wanted to come see her." Claudette navigated a left turn with one hand. "I did not tell her that I called you first." Shaq processed this. "Is that going to be a problem?" Claudette made a face that acknowledged this was a reasonable question while declining to give a definitive answer. "Renata is going to be annoyed at me," she said. "She has been annoyed at me many times over the course of her life. She gets over it. I am her older sister. It is my job to do the things she won't do herself. She told you to call me? She told me she was going to handle it. She had been saying she was going to handle it for 3 weeks. Claudette glanced at him briefly, the glance of a driver who keeps her eyes on the road but misses nothing. "Renata handles things carefully. She thinks everything through from every angle before she moves. It is one of her best qualities. It is also, sometimes, the thing that keeps her from moving at all. She said it without judgment. It was simply an observation about her sister, stated with the accuracy and the affection that 22 years of watching a person closely produces. They drove in silence for a few minutes. The highway gave way to city streets, and the city streets gave way to the particular landscape of New Orleans as you move toward the older neighborhoods, the shotgun houses in their colors, the live oaks spreading across the sidewalks, the churches with their marquee signs offering spiritual guidance in language that ranged from the formal to the deeply practical. A Popeye's Chicken, a neighborhood bar that appeared to be open despite the hour. A woman walking a very small dog with enormous ears. "She's a good person," Claudette said. It was not a non sequitur. It was a continuation of something she had been building toward since the airport. "I want to say that before we get there. Whatever you thought about the decision she made, and you're going to have thoughts about it, I know that. She is a good person who made the best decision she knew how to make at 20 years old, with the information she had." Shaq looked out the window. A man was sitting on a porch on Claiborne Avenue with a cup of coffee, watching the morning. A child was riding a bicycle on the sidewalk, with the wobbling, determined energy of someone recently graduated from training wheels. "I'm not coming here angry," Shaq said. "I know you're not," Claudette said. "I'm not warning you. I'm just saying it." "So it's been said." She turned onto St. Claude Avenue. The brass bands did not start until later in the day, but the neighborhood was already moving. People out on their porches, music coming from somewhere a few blocks over, the Trome existing in its particular, unhurried Saturday morning way. There was a quality to this neighborhood that was unlike any other place Shaq had been, and he had been to most places. It felt inhabited, deeply, deliberately, historically inhabited, as though the ground itself had been claimed by the people who lived on it in a way that could not be undone by time or disaster or anything else that had tried. Claudette turned onto Ursuline's Avenue and slowed. The house was exactly as he had pictured it, which told him something about the reliability of memory. A shotgun double-painted terracotta orange with white trim, deep and vivid. The color of a place that has decided what it is and is not interested in being anything else. A small front porch with iron railings. 2 wooden chairs. A potted fern in the corner that was thriving with the particular vigor of plants that are genuinely cared for. A wind chime made of what appeared to be old spoons. And in one of the wooden chairs, sitting with a glass of something cold in her hand, looking out at the street with the expression of a person who has been waiting and has been thinking while waiting, was Renata Josephine Turode. Claudette pulled to the curb and put the car in park. "Ready?" she said. Shaq looked through the windshield at the woman on the porch. She had not looked up yet. She was looking down the street in the other direction, and the morning light was falling across her at an angle that the 20-year-old version of him would have looked at and found no words for. She was 49 years old. Her hair was shorter than it had been at 18, natural and close, shot through in a few places with early gray that she had clearly decided to leave alone. She was still in her nursing scrubs from the overnight shift. Dark blue top, dark pants, the practical shoes of a woman who stands on hard floors for 12 hours at a stretch. There were lines in her face that had not been there the last time he saw her. Not the lines of hardship exactly, though some of them were. The lines of a full life, completely lived. Katrina was in there somewhere. 21 years of raising a child alone was in there. The overnight shifts and the patients and the Monday red beans and the Thursday line dancing class and all the ordinary, extraordinary fabric of a life that had kept going without him in it. She looked, Shaq thought, like someone who had become exactly who they were going to be. He opened the car door. He unfolded himself from the Honda Accord, a process that the car accommodated with limited grace, and he stood up on the sidewalk of Ursuline's Avenue in the March morning sun. Renata heard the car door. She looked. For a moment she was completely still, the glass in her hand, and the morning light around her, and the wind chime moving slightly behind her, and no expression on her face that could be named yet. Just the pure, unguarded moment before a person decides how to receive something that is larger than they had prepared for. Then she stood. She set the glass carefully on the porch railing. She looked at him across the small distance of the front yard, across the iron gate, across 22 years. "You are still too big," she said. Her voice was exactly the same. Exactly. "You are still too short," he said. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. The ancestor of a smile. The material from which a smile is assembled before it becomes one. Claudette appeared from around the car, moved through the front gate, climbed the porch steps, patted her sister once on the arm with the brisk efficiency of a person completing a mission, and disappeared through the front door without a word. The door closed behind her with a quiet, final click. Renata looked at the closed door. Then she looked at Shaq. "She called you first," Renata said. It was not a question. "Yeah," Shaq said. "She told me you called." "Yeah," Shaq said. "She did." Renata absorbed this with the particular expression of a woman adding a new item to a mental list she has been keeping about her older sister for some 6 decades. A list that was long and detailed and composed in equal parts of exasperation and love. She looked at the closed door once more. Then she seemed to make a decision about it. To file it. To deal with it later. To set it aside for now because there were more important things on this porch at this moment than the question of who called whom first. She gestured to the second wooden chair. "Sit down," she said, "before you make my porch look small." He came through the gate. He sat in the chair. The chair was solid. Good wood, old wood, the kind of furniture that has been on a New Orleans porch for 30 years and has survived weather and Mardi Gras and one major hurricane, and has no intention of being defeated by a 300-pound retired basketball player. It held. Renata went inside without explaining why and came back with a glass of sweet tea. The real kind, Louisiana sweet tea. The kind that is essentially sugar that has agreed to spend some time near a tea bag, and handed it to him without asking if he wanted it, the way you hand things to people when you have known them long enough to know what they need. He took it. He held it in both hands. Outside, on some corner of the trémé that the March morning had already delivered a reason to celebrate, a brass band was beginning to play. Unhurried, building from a low note up, the sound drifting over the rooftops, and the live oaks, and the terracotta houses, like something that had always been there and always would be. They sat for a moment in the particular silence of two people who have not spoken in 22 years, and are finding, with some surprise, that the silence is not uncomfortable, that it has texture, that it contains things. Then Renata said, "I have something to show you." She said it quietly, without drama, in the way you say a thing when you have been rehearsing it for 22 years and have finally gotten to the part of the story where it has to be said. Shaq set his sweet tea on the porch railing. He looked at her. She held his gaze for a moment, steady, assessing, the same look she had given him 33 years ago over an argument about cayenne pepper, the look that actually saw him rather than the famous shape of him. Then she went inside. The brass band played on. The wind chime made of old spoons moved in the March air. Shaq sat in the wooden chair on the terracotta porch and felt the particular stillness of a person who is about to be handed something that will change the shape of everything they thought they knew. He did not know what it was yet. He would know in 60 seconds. And for the rest of his life, he would measure time in 2 categories. Everything before those 60 seconds, and everything after. Inside the house, at the back of the bedroom closet, on the shelf above the winter coats, on a box of old nursing textbooks, and a bag of Christmas decorations that had not been unpacked since 2019. Renata reached up and brought down a Nike shoebox. Size 8. Her size. The cardboard soft at the corners from the years. A rubber band holding the lid on, stretched but still holding, the way things hold when they are asked to hold something for a very long time. She stood in her bedroom for a moment with the box in her hands. Then she walked back toward the porch, back toward the question that had been waiting 22 years for its answer. She set the shoebox on the porch railing between them. Not on the floor, not on the small table by the door, on the railing, exactly between the two chairs, equidistant, the way you place something when you want both people to have equal claim to it, or equal responsibility for it. The morning light fell across the Nike logo on the side of the box, and across Renata's hands, which were resting on top of the lid, and across Shaq's face, which had gone very still. He looked at the box. He looked at her hands on top of it. He did not say anything. Renata did not open it immediately. She stood beside the railing, and she looked at the box herself. For a moment, the way you look at something that you have been carrying for so long that you have almost forgotten what it looks like from the outside. Almost, but not quite. Because some things you never stop seeing clearly no matter how accustomed you become to their weight. The brass band on the corner of St. Claude Avenue was building now, moving from the slow opening into something fuller. The trumpet coming up over the tuba, the snare drum finding its rhythm. Somewhere on the next block, a screen door opened and closed. A car moved slowly down Ursuline's Avenue, the driver's window down, an arm resting on the door in the unhurried way of a person with nowhere urgent to be. "I want to explain something first," Renata said. Her voice was even. She had clearly decided how she was going to do this, and she was doing it that way, methodically, from the beginning, in the order that made sense. This was her nurse's way. You did not start in the middle. You started at the beginning, and you moved through it with care. "Before you see what's in here," she said, "I want you to understand something clearly. I am not showing you this box because I am still in love with you." She said it without embarrassment and without apology. As a fact, as a necessary piece of context that had to be established before anything else could be established. "I stopped being in love with you a long time ago," she said. "I made my peace with what we were and what we weren't. I built a life. A real one. I am not standing here on this porch as a woman who has been waiting for you to come back." Shaq nodded. One nod, slow and genuine. "I'm showing you this," she continued, "because you deserve to know what's in it. And because I am 49 years old, and I have kept this particular thing for 22 years, and I am done keeping things past the point where the keeping of them makes sense." She paused. The keeping of it made sense once. It doesn't anymore. She took the rubber band off the box. She lifted the lid. She set the lid on the other side of the railing, and she stepped back slightly, giving him room to look. The box was full. Not overflowing, not chaotic. Organized in the careful, deliberate way of a person who put things in the box with intention, and not in a rush. Everything placed, everything present for a reason. The photographs were on top. Old photographs, physical ones, printed on paper, the edges slightly worn with the particular softness that photographs develop when they have been handled carefully, many times over many years. Not worn from carelessness, worn from being looked at. There is a difference, and it is visible if you know what you are looking for. The first one Shaq saw was the crawfish boil. April 1991. Someone had taken it with a disposable camera. You could tell from the quality. The slight grain. The colors that were vivid in the way that colors from disposable cameras are vivid. Oversaturated and warm in a way that digital photographs almost never are. Shaq in the background, bent at an impossible angle trying to get his head into the frame because the person taking the photo had not accounted for his altitude. Renata in the foreground in her yellow sundress, laughing at something, her head turned slightly away from the camera, caught in the moment before she knew she was being photographed, which is the only moment when anyone ever looks entirely like themselves. He stared at that photograph for a long time. He picked it up carefully, the way you pick up something small and old, and held it. His hands, which were large enough that a regulation NBA basketball sat in his palm like a grapefruit, held this small photograph with a gentleness that was its own kind of information. He set it down and looked at the others. There was one of him at a payphone outside the Pete Maravich Assembly Center, an actual payphone, the mounted-on-the-wall kind, the kind that no longer existed anywhere in the country and had not for years, the receiver dwarfed in his hand, his expression focused and private in the way faces look when they do not know they are being watched. Renata had taken this one. He remembered now, the memory arriving fully formed. She had driven up from New Orleans on a Tuesday afternoon without telling him, had parked in the student lot and walked across the campus and found him on the phone and taken the picture from 20 feet away before he saw her. He had laughed when he spotted her. The laugh was not in the photograph, it was in the memory, which was suddenly so vivid it felt recent. There was a photograph from Lafayette, Louisiana, fall of 1991, a Zydeco concert at a venue on Jefferson Street, the two of them against a wall with the band visible behind them, Shaq bent almost in half, trying to fit his head next to hers in the frame. She was grinning, he was grinning. They were 20 and 21 years old, and the grins were the unguarded kind that people stop being able to produce past a certain age, when life has added enough layers that every expression carries the weight of everything that came before it. He looked at his own face in that photograph for a long time. He was trying to remember being that unguarded, trying to locate the version of himself that did not yet know what was coming, who had not yet been famous long enough for the fame to become a permanent condition of his face. He could find traces of it, only traces. There were ticket stubs, a Dookie Chase's restaurant receipt from November 1991, handwritten by whoever had been taking orders that day. The items listed in handwriting that had faded to a pale brown, but was still legible if you tilted it toward the light. 2 orders of fried chicken, 1 red beans and rice, 1 bread pudding. The bread pudding had been his. He had eaten the entire thing in approximately 4 minutes, and Renata had watched with an expression that was equal parts amusement and genuine concern for his well-being. He had forgotten about the bread pudding. The memory of it arrived now with extraordinary specificity, the taste of it, the particular afternoon light in Dookie Chase's dining room, the way Renata had said, "Are you even tasting it or just transporting it?" And with the memory came something else, something harder to name, that sat in the center of his chest, like a hand pressing gently but firmly. There was a letter, his handwriting. He recognized it immediately, because his handwriting was, and had always been, something that happened when a very large person tried to make a pen do a thing it was not designed at this scale to do. Enormous, sprawling, each letter the size that normal handwriting was not, occupying 4 full sheets of notebook paper to say what a more compact writer would have said in one. He did not read it. He could see his own words from above without reading them, and he did not need to read them. He knew the approximate content of letters he had written at 20 years old to a girl he was missing from 2 hours away. He did not need the specifics. The specifics were beside the point. He set the letter down carefully. There was a small pressed flower. It had been yellow once. Now it was the color of old paper, that particular faded ivory that yellow things become when they have been kept for long enough, still recognizable as the shape of a flower, but drained of its original brightness. The color held somewhere in memory instead of in the thing itself. He did not touch this one. He looked at it, sitting in its corner of the box, and he understood what it was and where it had come from, and he left it where it was. And then at the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, there was a piece of construction paper, red construction paper, folded once. The fold soft and well creased, the paper slightly thicker with age than it would have been new. He reached in and unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing in crayon, a family. You knew it was meant to be a family because of the arrangement. 4 figures standing together, rendered in the direct, confident, completely accurate by its own logic style of a child who knows what they are drawing and is not worried about whether anyone else will be able to see it. The figures were a family because they were together, because they were positioned the way families position themselves in drawings. Largest to one side, medium in the middle, two small ones to the other side. The largest figure was dramatically, cartoonishly, unmistakably taller than the others. Not just taller, towering. The crayon lines of the tallest figure went nearly to the top of the red construction paper while the others reached perhaps halfway. The size difference was so exaggerated that it could only have been drawn by a child who had been told, or who had understood, that the absent member of their family was extraordinarily, unusually, remarkably tall. A child who had rendered this fact with the complete literalism and the complete emotional honesty that children bring to drawings. Underneath the four figures, in the block letters of a child who had recently and carefully learned to form each one, pressing hard with the crayon, so the letters were thick and deliberate. My family Shaq looked at the drawing. He looked at it for a long time. The brass band on the corner had reached the full, rolling, joyful middle of whatever they were playing, the sound filling the March air over the treme, the way brass band music fills air, completely, warmly, as though the sound itself was a kind of weather. "That is not my handwriting," Shaq said. His voice was different than it had been, quieter. A different register, the voice of a man who is managing something large and doing it carefully. "No," said Renata, "it isn't." He looked up from the drawing. He looked at her. She met his gaze directly. She had been waiting for this moment, not with dread, she realized, but with something closer to the feeling she had at the end of a very long shift when she finally sat down. A kind of exhausted, honest relief. The relief of arriving somewhere after a long time of being in transit. "How old is the child who drew this?" Shaq asked. 5, Renata said. "He was 5 years old when he drew it. He drew it on a Sunday afternoon at that kitchen table in there." She nodded toward the front door without looking away from Shaq. His teacher had assigned them to draw their families. He came home and sat at the table and drew it without asking me any questions and without explaining it to me. And when he was done, he brought it to me and said, she stopped for 1/2 second. He said, "Mama, I left room for the tall one." The world made a sound. The brass band played. The wind chime moved. Somewhere a child laughed on the next street over, high and bright and brief, the way children laugh when something is genuinely funny to them. Shaq was not moving. He was sitting in the wooden chair on the terracotta porch on Ursulines Avenue, and he was not moving in the way that very large things become still, when they have absorbed an impact, not fallen, not broken, but fundamentally, permanently altered in their understanding of what they are standing on. "Tell me," he said. 2 words, the simplest request he had ever made. All of the language he had been given, all the interviews and speeches and post-game commentary and podcast monologues and 30 years of public talking, reduced to 2 words on a porch in New Orleans on a Saturday morning. Renata put her hands on the porch railing, and she looked at him, and she began. She had found out in November 1992, 6 weeks after Shaq played his first regular season NBA game for the Orlando Magic, October 16, 1992, against the Miami Heat, a game in which he scored 12 points and pulled down 18 rebounds, and the entire basketball world leaned forward in its seat and understood that what it was watching was not ordinary. 6 weeks after that game, 6 weeks after she had watched it on her grandmother Celestine's television and felt something complicated that she had not tried to name, she found out on a Tuesday morning in the Ursulines Avenue bathroom, the small one at the end of the hall with the hexagonal white floor tiles and the window that looked out on the neighbor's fig tree. She had been 20 years old, and she had stood in that bathroom with the test in her hand and the November light coming through the fig tree window, and the sound of Celestine moving around in the kitchen starting the red beans that she started every Monday, which was technically yesterday. But the smell was still in the house and the world had split. Before and after. She had sat on the edge of the bathtub. She had stayed there for a long time. Long enough that Celestine knocked on the door and asked if she was all right, and Renata said yes, she was all right. She just needed a minute. And Celestine said, "Take whatever you need, baby," and went back to the kitchen and the red beans. Then Renata had thought. She was a careful thinker, always had been. The nursing training had sharpened this quality but not created it. It had been there since childhood, the habit of looking at something from every angle before deciding what to do with it, of not reacting until she had understood. Claudette had always said it made Renata slow. Renata had always said it made her right. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in the November morning light and she thought about Shaquille O'Neal. She thought about who he was and what was ahead of him and what it would mean to call him with this news at this moment in his life and in hers. She ran the versions. She was honest with herself about each one. She did not let what she wanted to be true interfere with what was actually true, which was the hardest discipline of careful thinking and the most necessary. She had loved him. She wanted that stated clearly and kept in the record. She had loved him in the real, uncomplicated 20-year-old way. Not the way people love famous people, not from a distance, but up close, in the ordinary private moments that nobody else saw. She had loved the man who felt lonely in crowds. The man whose handwriting was enormous because everything about him was enormous and he had never apologized for any of it. The man who ate an entire bread pudding in 4 minutes and was entirely unashamed. She had loved him, and she had let him go, and she had done both of those things consciously and without bitterness, because she understood that some things are real and finite at the same time, and that the finiteness does not undo the reality. But this was different. This was not about her and Shaq. This was about a child who did not exist yet, but was going to, who had not asked to be born into a situation, and deserved to be thought about first, before anyone else, before Renata's feelings and before Shaq's career, and before the opinions of anyone who would have an opinion about it, which would be, given who Shaq was becoming, a very large number of people. She thought about what it would mean for this child to grow up inside a public story, to be the child of Shaquille O'Neal in the way that meant cameras and gossip, and being defined before you had the chance to define yourself. She thought about what it would mean for Shaq to receive this news at 21 years old, in his first NBA season, with the weight of an entire franchise's expectations on his very large shoulders. She thought about lawyers and negotiations, and the cold machinery of public life that would surround any arrangement they made, because that machinery surrounded everything that touched Shaq now. And then she thought about the Treme. She thought about Ursuline's Avenue, and Celestine's red beans, and the brass bands on the corner, and the second-line parades, and the fig tree outside, the bathroom window. She thought about 3 generations of her family in this soil, in these streets, in this neighborhood that had been built by people who had survived worse than difficult circumstances and had made something beautiful anyway. She thought, I can give this child that. She thought, that is enough. That is more than enough. She stood up from the edge of the bathtub. She washed her face. She went to the kitchen where Celestine was stirring red beans, and she sat down at the table, and she said, quietly, Grand-mère, I need to tell you something. And Celestine turned from the stove and looked at her granddaughter. Really looked, the way old women look when they already know what is coming. And she turned the burner down, and she pulled out a chair, and she sat down and she said, I am listening, baby. Tell me everything. She had not called Shaq. She had not called him in November 1992 when she found out. She had not called him in May 1993 when Isidore Tremaine Thoreau was born on a Wednesday morning at Charity Hospital in New Orleans, 7 pounds 11 ounces, with hands that the delivering nurse commented on. Look at those hands. "This baby has the biggest hands I have ever seen on a newborn." While Renata lay in the hospital bed with Claudette on one side and Marguerite on the other, and Celestine in the waiting room at 76 years old, refusing to go home. She had not called him when Izzy took his first steps, when he said his first word, which told you everything about what kind of person he was going to be, when he started getting tall, when the basketball coaches started calling, when Xavier offered him a scholarship, and he sat at the kitchen table on Ursuline's Avenue and read the letter twice, quietly, and then looked up at Renata and said, "Mama, this is real." She had not called because the reasons she had sat with on the edge of the bathtub in November 1992 had remained true. They had remained true through every stage and every year and every milestone. The public life that surrounded Shaq had not gotten smaller. It had gotten larger. The cameras were everywhere. The scrutiny was total. She had protected Izzy from that, completely and successfully. And the protection had been real. And the child had grown up whole and grounded, and himself in a way that she was not certain would have been possible otherwise. She did not regret the decision. She said that to Shaq directly, looking at him across the porch railing with the shoebox between them. She did not regret it. She wanted him to hear that clearly, without softening, because the truth deserved to be stated, without softening, even when it was hard to hear. "You're telling me," Shaq said slowly, "that I have a son." "Yes," Renata said. 21 years old. 21 years old in May. He's here. He's in New Orleans. He's at Xavier. He's at practice right now." She paused. "He plays basketball. He's very good." Something moved through Shaq's face. A series of things. Actually, rapid and complex and deeply human. The kind of cascade that happens when a person receives information that reorganizes everything they thought they knew about their own life. It was not anger. It was not the thing that looks like anger but is actually grief. It was something larger and more complicated than either of those things. Something that did not have a clean name. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, dropped to his sides. The biggest man in basketball history sat on a wooden chair on a porch in the Treme, and he was completely still. "The reason you never married," he said. It came out not as a question but as an arrival. The moment when the thing you have been traveling toward finally comes into view, and you understand that this was always where you were going. Renata was quiet for a moment. "I couldn't marry someone who didn't know the full truth of my life," she said. "And the full truth of my life was Izzy. The full truth of my life is Izzy." She paused. "The men who asked me, they were good men, every one of them. But they were asking to marry a version of me that wasn't complete. And I couldn't do that to them. And I couldn't do that to him." She said the last word, him, with a quiet, absolute finality that explained, in one syllable, every no she had ever said. Not to protect herself. Not to wait for Shaq. To protect her son from growing up inside a household that was built on an incomplete foundation. To refuse to give Izzy a stepfather who did not have all the information. 22 years of waiting. And it had never been about love. It had never been about Shaq at all. It had always, only, entirely been about the boy on the red construction paper. The tall one. The one she had left room for. Shaq looked at the drawing in his hand. The 4 crayon figures on the red paper. The block letters underneath. My family. He looked at his own hands holding the drawing. The largest hands in the history of the NBA, which had caught thousands of passes and held 4 championship trophies, and been photographed from every angle by every camera, and had swallowed up every hand that shook them for 30 years. Holding a child's crayon drawing on a porch in New Orleans on a Saturday morning. He said the only thing that was true, "I want to meet him." Inside the Accord, through the window she had cracked 2 inches. Claudette Buraz sat in the driver's seat with her reading glasses on her nose and the crossword puzzle from last Thursday's Times-Picayune in her lap. She was not doing the crossword puzzle. She was watching the porch. When she saw Shaq say those 4 words, she could not hear them, but she could read them. She had taught 6th grade for 30 years and could read lips through a car window. She allowed herself one small private nod. Then she picked up her pen. 11 across, 7 letters. A thing kept safely over time. She wrote KEPTSAFE. Then she crossed it out. She wrote TREASURE. That was the one. Isidore Tremaine Turode finished his free throw routine at 1:47 p.m. He knew the exact time because he always knew the exact time in a gymnasium, not from checking his phone. His phone was in his bag on the bleacher, face down, where it stayed during every practice session, whether mandatory or voluntary. He knew the time the way serious athletes know it. From the internal clock that develops when you spend enough years in a sport, to understand that time in a gymnasium is different from time anywhere. More deliberate, more accountable. Every minute in a gymnasium is a minute you are either using or wasting. And Izzy Turode had never been comfortable wasting them. He shot 40 free throws, made 37. The 3 he missed all went the same way, slightly right, the same mechanical error he had been working to correct since his sophomore season. A small hitch in his release that only appeared when he was tired and that he had not yet fully trained out of his body. He stood at the line after the 40th shot and bounced the ball twice and thought about the hitch. He thought about it with the specific, unsentimental attention of a person who is not interested in making excuses for themselves. Then he picked up his ball and walked to the bleachers and sat down. The gymnasium at Xavier University of Louisiana was quiet at this hour on a Saturday. The team had no official practice today. The other players were elsewhere, sleeping late, eating, doing the ordinary Saturday things of 21-year-old men who had earned a day off after a hard week of conditioning work. Izzy came in anyway. He came in most Saturdays. Not because Coach Arsenault asked him to, not because anyone was watching or keeping track, because the free throw percentage he wanted to have was not the free throw percentage he currently had, and the distance between those 2 numbers would only be closed by the time he spent alone in this gymnasium on mornings and afternoons when nobody required him to be here. This was who he was. He had been this way since he was 12 years old and figured out that the gap between what he could do and what he wanted to be able to do was a gap that closed only one way. You showed up. You did the work. You were honest about what needed fixing. And you fixed it without drama, because drama did not improve your free throw percentage. Renata had raised him to be honest about the gap. She had not used those exact words. She had said it the way she said most things. Directly, without decoration, in the language of a woman who spent her professional life dealing in facts because facts were what kept people alive. She had said, "The difference between who you are and who you want to be is just work, Izzy. That's all it is, just work." He had written that down when he was 15. He still had it. It was in his phone now, in the Notes app, the first note he had ever made in it and the one he had never deleted. The difference is just work. Mama. He sat on the bleacher and drank from his water bottle and let his heart rate come down. The gymnasium smelled the way gymnasiums always smell. Rubber and sweat and the particular industrial cleaner that every court in every school in the country seemed to use. A smell so universal that Izzy associated it not with any specific place, but with the condition of being a basketball player, which was the condition he had lived in for as long as he could remember. He thought about the European scouts. There had been 3 visits now, one from a team in Zaragoza, Spain, a mid-level Liga ACB club whose assistant coach had sat in the second row at 2 of Izzy's games with a tablet and a careful expression. One from a club in Lyon, France, whose representative had spoken to Coach Arsenault after the game and then asked Izzy 3 questions with an interpreter present, which had been a strange experience. The slight delay between word and meaning making everything feel slightly underwater. And one, most recently, from a team in Greece whose name, Izzy, had needed to look up afterward because his knowledge of Greek professional basketball was limited. Coach Arsenault had sat with Izzy in his office on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks ago and said the thing that coaches say when they are managing a player's expectations, while also genuinely believing what they are saying. You are a professional basketball player, Izzy. The question is not whether, the question is where and when. Izzy had listened. He had thanked Coach Arsenault. He had walked out of the office and stood in the hallway for a moment, with his back against the wall and his eyes closed. Where and when? Those were questions that required knowing something about yourself, the full picture of yourself, not the partial one. You could not decide where you were going without understanding completely where you came from. This was not philosophy. This was logistics. When the European scouts asked him about himself, his background, his influences, his basketball education, he answered what he could answer, and there was a part of the answer he could not give because he did not have it. He had his mother, he had the Treme, he had Xavier and Coach Arsenault, and the free throw routine, and the note in his phone. He had Claudette, who came to his home games and kept a running commentary that the people around her either loved or endured, depending on their tolerance for very specific and highly informed criticism of referee decisions. He had his grandmother Marguerite, who had died 3 years ago, and whose absence was still a specific shape in his life. A shape he had learned to move around without stumbling, but never stopped being aware of. He had all of that. It was enormous. It was real. But there was a question he had been carrying since approximately the age of 7. Not with anguish, not with the dramatic, consuming hunger that the absence of a parent sometimes produces in children who were raised to need that specific thing filled. He had not been raised to need it. Renata had been too complete a parent, and the Treme had been too complete a world, for the absence to produce a wound. It had produced, instead, a gap, a fact-shaped space, the kind of thing that does not hurt exactly, but that you are aware of, the way you are aware of a missing tooth, not constant pain, just the occasional reminder that something is not where it would logically be. He wanted the fact. That was all. He was 21 years old and about to step into a professional life in countries where people would ask him about himself. And he wanted the complete answer. His mother had said, "Give me 3 weeks." He trusted her. He had always trusted her with the completeness that children trust parents who have never given them a reason not to. She had told him the truth at every stage. A careful truth, an age-appropriate truth. More each year as he was ready for more. And the cumulative truth she had given him had always been enough for the moment it covered. He trusted that this truth would be too. He looked at the gymnasium ceiling. High above, the late afternoon light was coming through the high windows at the angle it came through them in March. The particular slant of it that meant winter was genuinely over, and something new was beginning. The light fell across the court in long rectangles, warm and sharp. He picked up his basketball. He dribbled it once, twice, 3 times, the sound bouncing off the empty bleachers and the high ceiling. He had his father's hands. He did not know this yet. He knew they were large, extraordinarily, impractically large. The kind of large that his coaches had noted from the beginning as an asset, and his teammates noted more casually and more frequently as the reason he could palm the ball in warm-ups in a way that still made people stop and look. He knew they were large, but he did not know why, did not know the specific genetic line that had produced this particular feature, did not know that somewhere in Atlanta, Georgia, the man who had given him this quality was sitting in a studio on Tuesday mornings with hands so similar to his that the comparison was less a resemblance than a replication. He would know soon. The call came to Renata's phone at 2:15 p.m. She was still on the porch. Shaq had not left. They had been talking, quietly, in the careful way of people navigating something significant without a map, finding the path by taking one step and then seeing where the next one could go. She had answered his questions. There had been many of them, and she had answered every one without deflection and without ornamentation. The same way she answered families at the hospital when they asked about someone they loved. Honestly, completely, with the understanding that the person asking deserved the full truth, more than they deserved to be protected from it. He had asked about the pregnancy, about the decision not to call, about the early years, about Katrina. Where had Izzy been during Katrina? How old was he? Were they safe? He had asked this with an urgency that arrived on his face before he could organize it into a measured question. The urgency of a parent who has just learned of a danger their child was in years ago and cannot stop themselves from responding to it, even though the danger is long past, she had told him. They had been on the second floor of the Ursulines' house, her and Izzy and Marguerite and Celestine, who was 86 years old during Katrina and had refused to evacuate on the grounds that she had been in this house longer than the storm had been a storm. The water had come to the porch steps. They had been fortunate. Other people had not been fortunate. The Treme had flooded in other sections, and the neighbors they knew had lost things that could not be replaced, and Renata had gone back to work. Charity Hospital within 72 hours of the storm passing, because hospitals do not stop needing nurses because of weather. Izzy had been 3 years old. He did not remember Katrina the way adults remember events. He remembered it the way very young children remember things, as a texture, a quality, a feeling, rather than a sequence of facts. He remembered the second floor. He remembered it being dark. He remembered Celestine singing something in French Creole very quietly in the corner of the bedroom, sitting in the chair by the window, the song low and repetitive and old. He had told Renata this when he was 12, and they were talking about the storm, and he had said, "I remember a song, I don't know what it was," and Renata had recognized it immediately. An old lullaby, her grandmother's lullaby, the one Celestine had been singing to children in that house for 60 years. Shaq had been quiet after this part of the story. He had looked at his hands. He had looked at the shoebox. He had looked at the drawing, still unfolded, still sitting on the porch railing. The 4 crayon figures standing in their red paper world, with the block letter declaration underneath. And then Renata's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. She looked at Shaq. "He's on his way home," she said. "He texted to ask if I want anything from the store." She held the phone up so Shaq could see the message. The ordinary, unremarkable text of a young man who has just finished practice and is thinking about his mother before he thinks about himself, which is a specific quality that reveals everything about how someone was raised. Heading out. "Need anything? Also, I think we're out of Zatarains," Renata typed back. "Come straight home. And yes, get the Zatarains." She put the phone in her scrub pocket. She looked at Shaq. "He'll be here in 20 minutes, she said. Shaq nodded. He looked at the gate at the end of the front path. The iron gate with the small lift latch that had been there for 30 years, the one Renata had learned to open before she was tall enough to see over it. He looked at it with the expression of a man trying to prepare himself for something he could not fully prepare for. Because some things cannot be prepared for, they can only be arrived at. "Does he look like me?" Shaq said. He had asked this already, 2 hours ago. He was asking it again. It was a question that needed to be asked more than once. Renata looked at him steadily. "The first time one of his coaches saw a photo of you," she said. "He called me. He said..." She paused, and something in her expression shifted, moved briefly through something that was almost humor and almost grief, and was entirely human. He said, "Miss Turode, I don't want to be in anyone's business, but I've been looking at this picture for 10 minutes, and I need you to tell me something." Shaq was very still. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said yes," Renata said, "and I asked him to keep it between us, and he did. He's been keeping it for 2 years." Shaq put his face in his hands. Not to cry, to contain something, to hold the dimensions of this moment inside his palms for a second, while he found his footing. His hands covered his face completely. The entirety of his face, from forehead to chin, swallowed by the palms that had swallowed every basketball, every handshake, every moment that required a grip. He held it there for 5 seconds. Then he brought his hands down. His eyes were clear. His expression was the expression of a man who has located solid ground and is standing on it now, deliberately, with his full weight. "Tell me about him," Shaq said. "Tell me who he is. I don't want to meet him like a stranger." So Renata told him. She told him about Izzy, the way you tell someone about a person you know so completely that the knowing of them is a part of the structure of your not the highlight reel version, not the proud mother version, though she was proud, quietly, enormously, in the way that does not need to be performed because it is simply true. She told him the real version. She told him about the free throw routine, how Izzy had developed it himself at 13, researching shooting mechanics the way other kids researched video games, coming to her one evening with a legal pad where he had written out the steps, the specific number of bounces, the breath, the release point, in the careful block printing he had used since first grade and never entirely grown out of, how he had practiced it every day since, without exception, through growth spurts that temporarily destroyed his coordination and came back. Through the season, Xavier missed the conference tournament, and he had played 60% of the game on a sprained ankle because he had decided to, through the weeks after Marguerite died, when Renata had found him in the driveway at 6 a.m. shooting free throws in the dark, because it was the thing he knew how to do when everything else felt beyond management. She told him about the legal pad, how Izzy kept legal pads everywhere, kitchen table, nightstand, his bag, how he wrote things down not in the modern way of people who type everything and keep it in their phones, but in the old way, in handwriting. Because he said the thinking happened differently when his hand was moving. How the legal pads were full of basketball notes, plays he was analyzing, tendencies he had observed in opponents, structural questions about the game, but also other things, quotes he liked, questions about history, a running list. Started when he was 16, of things he wanted to understand better. She told him about the music, how Izzy had grown up around brass bands and had never once wanted to play one, had no interest in instruments, no ear for it, something Claudette considered a personal failing, but Renata had made her peace with, but had a deep, serious love for jazz that was pure listener's love, the kind that does not need to participate in order to be real. How he knew the names of every major musician who had come out of the Treme, how he had gone alone to Snug Harbor on Frenchman Street on his 18th birthday and sat at the bar and listened to a quartet play for 3 hours, and come home with the expression of a person who had been given something important. She told him about the gentleness. This was the part she told him last, and told him most carefully, because it was the part that was hardest to explain without making it sound like something it wasn't, like softness, or like the absence of toughness, which it was not. Izzy was not gentle because he was weak. He was gentle because he was strong enough not to need to be otherwise. He was 6 feet 9 inches tall and had his father's physical presence, the same quality of occupying a room, the same unconscious authority of a body that has always been the largest in every space it entered. And he moved through this physical fact with a deliberateness and a care that people noticed without always being able to name what they were noticing. He held doors. He spoke to service workers by name after learning them once. He had a habit, when someone was talking to him, of going completely still, not just listening but fully present, his attention given entirely, the phone in his pocket and his eyes on the person, and everything else set aside. It was a quality that made people feel, when they talked to Izzy, that they were the only thing in the room. He had gotten it from Renata. She did not say this to Shaq, but she thought it, briefly, with the particular satisfaction of knowing that the most important thing she had tried to give her child had actually been received. Shaq listened to all of it without interrupting. He sat in the wooden chair in the March afternoon light, which had moved since the morning. The shadows longer now, the day beginning its slow turn toward evening, and he listened with the complete attention of a man who is trying to know in 20 minutes what he should have known for 21 years. When Renata finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He sounds like someone I'd like," he said. "He is someone you'd like," Renata said. "He's someone most people like. He makes it easy." "Does he know?" Shaq stopped. Reorganized the question. What exactly does he know right now, before he walks through that gate? He knows his mother called someone, Renata said. He knows that the 3 weeks are up. He knows it's time. She paused. He doesn't know it's you. Specifically, Shaq absorbed this. What does he think when he thinks about his father? It was a question that could have been asked defensively, with the weight of guilt in it. It was not. It was asked with genuine, straightforward curiosity. The question of a man who wants to understand the shape of the space he has occupied in another person's life without knowing he was occupying it. Renata considered it honestly. He thinks about his father the way he thinks about a lot of things he doesn't have full information on, she said. He files it. He keeps working. He knows the answer is coming, and he waits for it without letting the waiting be the main thing. She met Shaq's eyes. He has been doing that his whole life, and he is very good at it. Shaq heard this. He heard what was inside it, the implicit statement that the quality of patient, disciplined waiting that Izzy had developed was not entirely circumstantial, that it had been shaped, at least in part, by exactly this. By 21 years of a fact-shaped space in his life that he had learned to work around without stumbling because his mother had raised him to be the kind of person who worked around things without stumbling. She raised him well, Shaq said. He had said she before he caught himself. He looked at Renata. You raised him well, he said. She did not deflect it. She received it the way she received most things, directly, without excessive modesty and without performance. Yes, she said simply, I did. The iron gate opened at 2:41 p.m. Izzy came through it the way he came through most things, without announcement, without drama, moving at the unhurried pace of a person who does not need momentum from rushing to be confident in where they are going. He had his gym bag over one shoulder. He had a paper bag from the store in his other hand, which meant he had gotten the Zatarains. His warm-up jacket from Xavier was unzipped over a gray t-shirt. His hair, as Renata had noted that morning, needed a trim. He came 3 steps up the path before he saw the man on the porch. He stopped, not with alarm, not with the startled jolt of someone encountering the unexpected. He stopped the way he stopped on the basketball court when a play broke down and a new geometry presented itself, with a rapid, quiet, total reassessment, taking in the information, organizing it, deciding what it meant. He looked at the man in the wooden chair. The man was enormous, even sitting, even in the compressed arrangement of a very large body in a normal-sized chair. The scale of him was immediately apparent. Izzy had been the largest person in most rooms for most of his life, and he had some experience, therefore, in recognizing what very large looked like. This man was very large in the specific, particular way that Izzy was large. Not the broad, compact largeness of a lineman, not the height without weight of a swimmer, but the specific combination that basketball produces and selects for, height and wingspan, and the particular way of sitting that men with long femurs develop because furniture was not designed for them and they had worked out their own accommodations. Izzy looked at his face. He had seen this face before. He had seen it his entire life, on television, in magazines, in documentaries, in the photographs that came up when you typed certain things into a search engine late at night in your dorm room at 17 years old because you were 17 and curious, and the question had been sitting in you for 10 years, and the internet was right there. He had seen it enough times that he knew every version of it. The young version, the championship version, the television personality version, the version it was now at 52 years old, on a wooden chair on his mother's porch. He knew whose face it was. He had known, he realized, for longer than he had let himself fully acknowledge. He had filed it. He had kept working. He had waited without letting the waiting be the main thing. He stood at the third step of the path with the gym bag on his shoulder and the Zatarain's in his hand, and he was very still. Shaq stood up from the chair. The standing took a moment. The unfolding of that much person from that small a chair, and when he was fully upright, the scale of him was even more apparent. The height and the presence, and the specific way of occupying vertical space. They looked at each other. Father and son, 52 years old and 21 years old, separated by 31 years, and a decision made in a bathroom in November 1992, and everything that had come after, all of it, every single day. The resemblance was not subtle. It was not the kind of resemblance that requires a second look, or the right angle, or a particular expression to become visible. It was immediate and total. The same jaw, the same forehead, the same way of holding the shoulders, the same quality of physical presence that announced itself simply by existing. Izzy looked at Renata. Renata looked at her son with the expression she had been carrying inside her for 22 years. The expression that contained the decision and the weight of the decision, and the complete, uncompromising love that had been the reason for the decision, and had never, not for one day, wavered in its certainty that the decision had been right. She held his gaze. She did not apologize with her eyes. She explained with them. And because he was her son, and he knew her face the way he knew his own, he read the explanation completely. He nodded. One nod. Slow, receiving it. Then he turned back to Shaq. "I know who you are," Izzy said. His voice was even. The same register he used on the court when the game was close, and the moment was large, and the right response to that was not volume or emotion, but clarity. The voice of a person who has decided not to let the size of a moment be the thing that determines how they move through it. "I know who I am too," Shaq said. His voice was different, lower than usual, stripped of the performance that 30 years of being Shaq had inevitably layered onto his public voice. This was the voice underneath all of that. The voice he used with his mother on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. "I just found out the rest of it today." Izzy came up the remaining steps. He set the Zatarains on the porch railing next to the shoebox. He set his gym bag down. He sat in the chair that Claudette had brought out that morning. The third chair, positioned between the other two like a center spot in a constellation. He put his hands on his knees. Shaq sat back down. Renata looked at the two of them. The same hands on the same knees, the same angle of the spine, the same slight forward lean that very tall people develop when they are trying to be at eye level with the world. She looked at them for one long moment. Then she went inside. Some things you give people and then you step out of the way of. And this was one of them. She had been the bridge. She had built it carefully. Over 22 years, one plank at a time. And now the two people who needed to cross it were on it. Her part, the carrying part, was done. She went to the kitchen. She put the Zatarains in the pantry. She stood at the kitchen window that looked out on the neighbor's fig tree. The same window she had looked out of in November 1992, when the world split into before and after, and she listened to the quiet sounds of the treme on a Saturday afternoon in March. A brass band somewhere, a screen door, the wind chime made of old spoons, and from the porch, just barely audible through the kitchen window, two voices, one low and enormous and familiar, one younger and steady and entirely his own, finding their way toward each other. For the first time, in the car on the street, Claudette Bourras finished the crossword puzzle at 2:58 p.m. She had been working on it since the airport. She capped her pen. She looked at the porch through the windshield. She could not see the two of them from this angle. The porch railing was in the way, and the fern in the corner, and the particular geometry of the house. But she could see Renata's shadow moving in the kitchen window. She could see the kitchen light come on. Claudette sat back in the driver's seat of her 12-year-old Honda Accord on Ursulines Avenue in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, and she allowed herself, privately and completely, to feel the full weight of what she had done and what it had produced. Then she folded the crossword puzzle and put it in the glove compartment. She started the car. She drove away. She did not say goodbye. She did not need to. She had done the thing that needed doing, and the doing of it was its own goodbye, its own arrival, its own complete and sufficient act. Older sisters do not wait for credit. They simply make the call. The porch held them the way the Treme held everything. Without fuss, without ceremony, with the quiet, load-bearing steadiness of a place that has been holding things, people, histories, griefs, celebrations, ordinary Tuesday afternoons and extraordinary Saturday mornings, for longer than anyone currently alive can remember, and has developed through this long practice a kind of structural patience that communicates itself to anyone who sits still enough to feel it. Shaq and Izzy sat on the porch of the terracotta house on Ursulines Avenue, and for the first 30 seconds, neither of them said anything. This was not uncomfortable. That was the thing that surprised Shaq most, in the immediate aftermath of Renata going inside and the door closing softly behind her, and the two of them being left alone with each other, and the two of them March afternoon and the distant brass band and 21 years of not knowing each other. He had expected discomfort. He had braced for the specific awkwardness of two people who are supposed to mean something enormous to each other and are meeting for the first time. The terrible pressure of that expectation, the way it can make every word feel insufficient before it is spoken. Instead, there was just the porch, and the afternoon, and the two of them in it. Izzy was looking out at Ursulines Avenue, not avoiding Shaq's gaze, not looking away from anything, simply looking at the street the way he looked at it every day, with the comfortable familiarity of a person for whom this particular view had always meant home. A woman was walking a dog past the gate. Two kids were on bicycles at the far end of the block. The live oak on the sidewalk 2 houses down was doing what live oaks in New Orleans do in March, which is put out new growth in small, bright bursts that make the whole tree look like it is thinking green thoughts. "She told you about Katrina," Izzy said. It was not a question. He said it the way he said things that he had already reasoned out, as a statement waiting to be confirmed rather than a question waiting to be answered. "Yeah," Shaq said. "She told you we were on the 2nd floor. She told me." Izzy was quiet for a moment. "I was 3, he said. "I don't remember most of it the way you remember things when you're older. I remember pieces, feelings, mostly." He paused. "I remember my great-grandmother Celestine singing." "What did she sing?" "I don't know the name of it. Old song. French Creole. She sang it every time any of us was scared, our whole lives. Me and my cousins. She would just start singing it, and whatever was happening would get a little smaller." He considered this. "She passed when I was 2, so technically I shouldn't remember her at all. But I remember the song." Shaq looked at the side of Izzy's face, the jaw, the forehead, the particular way the light hit the angle of the cheekbone, which was his own cheekbone, his own jaw, his own forehead, arranged on a 21-year-old face, with his mother's coloring and her patience in the set of the mouth. "How long have you known," Shaq said, "that it was me?" Izzy turned to look at him for the first time since Renata had gone inside. The look was direct and assessing, and completely without hostility. The look of someone who is being honest, and expects honesty in return, and is confident enough in this expectation not to be aggressive about it. 17, Izzy said. "I looked you up when I was 17. I had enough information by then. What she had told me over the years, a few things I had pieced together, the fact that she went to LSU games sometimes when I was very young, and then stopped. I looked you up, and I looked at your face, and I knew. Did you tell her you knew? No. Why not? Izzy was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't have the answer, but because he was organizing it. Because she had a reason for doing it the way she was doing it, he said. She always has a reason. I don't always know what it is when she's doing it, but it always turns out to be real. He looked back at the street. I trusted she was going to get there. I just had to wait. Shaq absorbed this. You've been waiting 4 years, he said. I've been living 4 years, Izzy said. There was no correction in it. He was not setting Shaq straight or scoring a point. He was clarifying something genuinely, the way precise people clarify things when an inaccuracy sneaks into a sentence. The waiting wasn't the main thing. I was at Xavier. I was playing basketball. He paused. I was figuring out who I was going to be. The rest of it I knew I would get to. Shaq sat with this for a moment. He thought about himself at 17, about what he had been at 17, already 6'10", already being recruited by every major program in the country, already understanding that his future was going to be enormous and unusual in ways that other people's futures were not. He had been certain at 17, with the absolute, uncomplicated certainty of someone who has never had real reason to doubt himself. He had known exactly who he was going to be. He had not been patient in the way Izzy described. He had not needed to be patient about his own identity. His identity had always been the loudest, largest, most undeniable thing in every room. This boy had grown up without that particular certainty, without the full picture of himself, and had developed something in the space where that certainty was missing that Shaq recognized as more valuable than certainty. He had developed trust in his mother, in the process, in the idea that the answer was coming and that the waiting was not wasted. I owe you an apology, Shaq said. Izzy turned to look at him. Not for the decision your mother made, Shaq said quickly. That was hers. He stopped, looked for the honest word. I'm still finding out how I feel about that. That's going to take more than one Saturday afternoon. He said it without accusation, as a fact. But I owe you an apology for 21 years of not knowing you existed and therefore not being here. That's not something I could have controlled, but it's still a real thing, and you deserve to hear me say it directly. Izzy looked at him for a long moment. My coach at Xavier, Izzy said, told me something in my freshman year that I wrote down. He said, you only own what you actually did. You don't own what you didn't know. He paused. I've thought about that a lot. With regard to you specifically. Shaq was quiet. You didn't know, Izzy said, simply, completely, without the weight of performance or the effort of forgiveness, which is what forgiveness looks like when it is genuine, not a grand gesture but a plain statement of fact. You didn't know, so there's nothing to apologize for. The brass band on the corner arrived at the peak of whatever they were building toward. The full, rolling, open-throated sound of it filling the afternoon air over the treme, trumpets and tuba, and the drum keeping the whole thing anchored and moving at once. The sound that this neighborhood had been making for 100 years and intended to keep making for 100 more. Shaq looked at the gate. Can I ask you something? He said. Yeah, the number. 33. Why 33? Izzy looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. A slight opening, a door moving an inch on its hinge. My great-grandfather's number, he said. Isidore Turod. He played semi-pro ball in New Orleans in the 1950s. My mother told me about him when I was picking my number freshman year. He paused. But also, he stopped. Also, Shaq said, your rookie year jersey number was 32, Izzy said. At LSU, you were 33. The door opened a little further. So you knew at 17, Shaq said. I knew at 17, Izzy said. And I picked 33 at 18. A brief pause. Both things are true. Shaq looked at him for a moment. at this 21-year-old man who had spent 4 years carrying a fact without letting it become a burden, who had chosen a number that meant two things and kept both meanings quietly, and did not need to explain them to anyone until the right moment, who was honest and patient and precise in a way that was not Shaq's way but that Shaq could see, unmistakably, had come from somewhere in the same place Shaq himself had come from. "You're a thinker," Shaq said. "Mama's influence," Izzy said. "You got my hands, though." Izzy looked down at his hands on his knees. He turned them over once, palms up, fingers spread, the way you look at something that is yours, but that you are seeing from a new angle. He had the hands his whole life. He had heard about them his whole life. He had never known their precise origin. He turned them back over. "Yeah," he said. "I did." Renata heard the laugh from the kitchen. She was at the stove, the red beans on, not because it was Monday, which was the traditional day, but because she needed something to do with her hands. And red beans was the thing her hands knew how to do, without requiring her brain to organize. The steps. She had sorted the beans. She had done the trinity: onion, celery, bell pepper, in the way her mother had shown her, and her mother's mother had shown her mother, the knife going through the vegetables in the sequence, and at the speed that was muscle memory now, not thought. She heard the laugh at 3:22 p.m. It came through the front window, the living room window with the old wooden frame that had never fit quite right in its track since Katrina, and let in a sliver of outside air even when fully closed. The laugh came through that sliver. It was Izzy's laugh. She would know it from the other side of any wall, in any building, at any volume, because she had been listening to it for 21 years, and it was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. But there was something in it she had not heard before. A quality, a resonance. The way a note sounds different when it is played in a room with better acoustics. The same note, the same instrument, but something in the surrounding space amplifying it, giving it a fullness it had not quite had before. She stood at the stove with the wooden spoon in her hand. She did not go to the window. She stayed where she was. She let it come through the sliver in the old frame and fill the kitchen. Then she heard the other laugh, lower, enormous. The laugh that filled rooms, that she had first heard over an argument about cayenne pepper on an April Saturday in 1991, that she had heard on television and in podcasts and in the background of sports broadcasts for 22 years, while telling herself she was not specifically listening for it. The two laughs were the same laugh, different rooms, different acoustics, different notes on the scale, but the same essential laugh. The laugh of people who find the same things funny, who respond to the same quality of absurdity in the world, who have the same instinct for where the humor lives inside a situation. Renata looked at the red beans. She stirred them. She allowed herself one thing, standing at the stove in her scrubs in the Ursulines Avenue kitchen, with the spoon in her hand, and both laughs coming through the window. One thing, private and complete, that did not need to be shown to anyone, or explained to anyone, or processed out loud. She allowed herself to feel, with the full force of it and without deflection, that she had done the right thing, not the easy thing, not the thing that had cost nothing, the right thing, which had cost her 22 years of a specific kind of solitude and 3 good men, and the explanation she had never given anyone, and the full truth she had kept folded inside her like the red construction paper, worn soft at the crease from being carried. The right thing. And it had produced this exact laugh coming through this exact window on this exact Saturday afternoon in March. She stirred the beans. She added a bay leaf. She turned the burner down to let it go slow, the way red beans want to go, the way all things that are worth having want to go. Not rushed, not forced, just steady heat and enough time and trust in the process. On the porch, the laugh had started with the free throws. Shaq had asked about the routine. Had asked because Renata had described it, and because it was the kind of detail that a basketball man cannot hear without wanting the specifics. 40 free throws, 37 made today. The same miss, slightly right, a hitch in the release. He had asked Izzy to describe the hitch. Izzy had described it with precision. The exact moment in the motion where the release caught. The fraction of a second between the wrist snap and the ball leaving the hand where something was not quite right. He described it the way Coach Arsenault had described things to him, technically, without ego, as a problem to be understood and solved rather than a flaw to be embarrassed about. Shaq had listened, and then he had said, "That's the same hitch I had at your age." Izzy had looked at him. "The exact same one," Shaq said. "Slightly right. The wrist doesn't finish." He paused. "I shot 62% from the line over my whole career. People gave me a lot of grief about it." He considered this. Fair grief. "I deserved it." "What fixed it?" Izzy said. "Nothing," Shaq said. "I never fixed it. I worked on it my whole career, and I never fully fixed it." Izzy looked at him. Shaq shrugged. An enormous, unhurried shrug. The shrug of a man who has made his peace with something through the long process of accepting that some things are simply true about you. "I shot 62% and I won 4 championships, and I was the most dominant player of my era, and I never fixed my free throw hitch. Those things coexist." There was a pause. Then Izzy laughed. Not at Shaq, not unkindly. He laughed with the recognition of someone who has been handed a piece of information that is useful and funny and unexpectedly human all at the same time. He laughed, the laugh that was his laugh, that Renata had known for 21 years, that was now, in this moment, recognizably and undeniably also something else. And Shaq laughed. The two laughs met on the porch of the terracotta house on Ursulines Avenue, and became one sound, one quality of amusement at the same thing. Two people finding the same thing funny for the same reason. And this was the moment, more than the recognition, and more than the drawing, and more than any of the things that had been said in the long, careful conversation of this Saturday afternoon that felt like a beginning. Not a resolution, not a conclusion, a beginning. The specific, irreversible beginning of something that had not existed before this afternoon and would not stop existing after it. "I'm going to fix mine," Izzy said, when the laughing had settled. "I believe you," Shaq said. 62% is not good enough for where I want to go." "No," Shaq agreed. "It isn't. The European leagues, the ACB especially, they're sophisticated. They'll build their whole defensive scheme around a weak free throw shooter." "I've watched the film." "You've watched the film," Shaq said. "I watch a lot of film," Izzy said. "It's how I think. I need to see the whole picture before I can understand my place in it." He said it without awareness of what he was saying, of the way those words expanded beyond basketball to contain everything else. The whole conversation, the whole afternoon, the whole 21 years. He said it as a statement about film study, and it was also, simultaneously, a statement about everything. Shaq heard both meanings. He did not point it out. Some things you receive quietly and carry without annotation. "The ACB team in Zaragoza," Shaq said. "They've been to your games." Izzy looked at him. "How do you—" "I know people," Shaq said, simply. "I've known them for 30 years. He paused. "I made a call last week, before I came here. I told someone to go look at a 6'9" power forward at Xavier with a free throw hitch and the best court vision I'd heard described in a long time." Izzy was still. "You made a call," he said. "I made a call," Shaq said, "before you knew for certain." "I knew enough," Shaq said. "The area code was 504. The name was Tirode. And Claudette told me you played basketball." He looked at his hands. "I did the math." Izzy looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the gate, then at the porch floor, then at his own hands on his knees. turned them over once in the same motion he had used before, palms up, the span of them visible, the particular size and shape that had been a curiosity his whole life, and was now explained. "You didn't have to do that," Izzy said. "No," Shaq said. "I didn't have to." He said nothing further. He did not explain the call as obligation, or as guilt, or as the gesture of a man compensating for 21 years of absence. He let it stand as what it was, the first thing a father could do, done immediately, done before the full picture was confirmed, done on the strength of a 504 area code and a name and the math. The afternoon light was getting longer. The shadows of the live oaks fell across the sidewalk in the particular way of late afternoon March shadows, stretched and golden, warm at the edges. The whole street looking briefly like a painting of itself. The brass band had moved on. From somewhere farther away, 2-3 blocks, drifting on the March air, another one had started. This was the Treme. There was always another one. "Can I ask you something?" Izzy said. "Anything," Shaq said. He meant it without qualification. "What was she like?" Izzy said. "When you knew her, when you were 20. He asked it quietly, not with longing, not with the particular ache of a child asking about a parent they have not had access to. He asked with the genuine, non-urgent curiosity of someone filling in a picture, adding a piece that had been missing, wanting to see the full thing. Shaq looked at the front door of the house. Beyond it, somewhere in the kitchen, Renata was cooking something. He could not smell it yet, but he knew it was happening because he knew, now, that this was what she did in a kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, when something significant was taking place on her porch, and her hands needed to be busy. He thought about the question honestly. "She was the most straightforward person I had ever met," he said. "Not simple. Straightforward. There's a difference." He paused. "Every other person in my life at that point wanted something from me. Not in a bad way, mostly. Just, I was the thing that was going to be famous, and everybody knew it, and so everybody related to me through that, through what I was going to be." He looked at Izzy. "She related to me through what I was. 20 years old, too tall, lonely in crowds, eating bread pudding too fast." A brief pause. She saw that guy, she talked to that guy, she argued about cayenne pepper with that guy. He stopped. "I have never forgotten what that felt like. In 30 years of being very famous and very surrounded by people, I have not forgotten what it felt like to have someone see the guy underneath all of it." Izzy listened to this with the complete stillness he brought to things he was going to keep. "She's still like that," he said. "I know," Shaq said. "I could see it in 20 minutes. She does it with her patients too," Izzy said. "I've seen her at the hospital a few times, visiting someone. She does the same thing. She sees the person, not the patient. It's why they always ask for her specifically." He paused. "She taught me to do that." She said, "The most important skill you can have with another person is making them feel like the most important thing in the room. Not for performance, for real." Shaq was quiet. He thought about 48 hours of a 504 area code sitting in his head, about a Tuesday morning podcast that had gone unrecorded, about a protein shake poured down a sink, about a Delta window seat over the flat green expanse of Louisiana, pressing his forehead to the glass. He thought about the red construction paper. "My family," the tall one, leaving room. "I want to be in your life," Shaq said. "I want to say that directly, and I want to say it without putting any weight on you about what that has to look like. You are 21 years old and you have your own life and your own plans, and you don't owe me anything. I want to be clear about that." Izzy was listening. "But if you want, whenever you want, at whatever pace makes sense to you, in whatever shape fits, I want to be there." He paused. "I have a lot to learn. About you. 21 years worth. I'm not going to pretend I can get there fast. But I want to get there." The street was quiet for a moment. The distant brass band played on. Izzy looked at him. That full, calm, assessing look that was his mother's look, that actually saw what it was looking at. "You came when she called," Izzy said. "Yeah," Shaq said. "You canceled your whole day and you came." "Yeah? And you made the call before you knew for certain." "Yeah?" Izzy nodded. The same slow, receiving nod he had given his mother when she explained. The nod of someone who has been given information that fills a space accurately. Not perfectly, not without complexity, but accurately. And who recognizes the fit. "Okay," he said, 2 syllables. His word for yes. The word he used when he had thought something through completely and arrived at a place he was willing to stand on. His mother would have recognized it immediately. It meant not just agreement, it meant readiness. It meant, "I've found solid ground, and I am standing on it, and we can go forward from here." Shaq heard what it meant. He extended his hand. Not for a handshake. Not exactly. He extended it the way you extend something when you don't have the right gesture for the moment, and so you offer what you have, which is presence, which is contact, which is the simple human fact of being physically in the same space and reaching across the small distance of. Izzy looked at the hand. He reached out and took it. Their hands were the same. Everyone would have seen it, and everyone would have known. The same span across the knuckles, the same length of the fingers, the same quality of large that was not just large, but particularly this kind of large, the kind that palm whole basketballs and bend rims and hold championship trophies and draw 4-figure families on red construction paper because someone told you that you had a father who was very tall, and you rendered him with the complete, loving, literal accuracy of a 5-year-old who understood the most important fact about him. The same hands. The same hands on Ursulines Avenue in the Treme, in the long March afternoon light, with the brass band playing and the live oaks dropping their March shadows and the red beans going slow on the stove inside the terracotta house. Father and son. For the first time, Renata did not come back to the porch for another hour. She stirred the beans. She added the andouille she had in the refrigerator, sliced thin, the way her mother had taught her. She added the bay leaf and the thyme and the small amount of cayenne that she always added and that she had always believed was the correct amount. A belief she had held without wavering since she was 18 years old, arguing with her cousin Percival about this exact question. She turned the burner to its lowest setting. She went to the window and she looked out at the fig tree. The same fig tree. The same window. March light now instead of November light. 32 years later, the world changed in every way that matters, and the fig tree entirely unchanged. And somehow both of these things true at the same time. She thought, I made a decision in this house a long time ago, and I stood by it, and I raised him well, and today I gave him the rest of the picture, and he took it the way he takes everything, which is with both hands. She thought, it is enough. It is more than enough. She heard, from the porch, the sound of 2 voices, one enormous and one younger, and both of them easy now. The initial careful weight of the first conversation giving way to something that had begun, tentatively and genuinely, to sound like 2 people who might simply like each other. She went to the cabinet. She got 3 bowls. She set them on the counter. Then she went to the porch door and opened it. "Beans are almost ready," she said. "Both of you wash your hands." Izzy stood up without argument, the automatic compliance of a grown man who has been told by his mother to wash his hands before dinner his entire life, and has not yet reached the age where he considers arguing about it. Shaq stood up. He looked at Renata in the doorway. She looked at him. There was no speech for this moment. There was no sentence that contained what had happened today on this porch, in this house, in this neighborhood, in the 22 years that had led to this Saturday afternoon, and the 22 years before that had led to the crawfish boil, and the KN argument, and the 4 hours of talking, and the 8 months of something that did not have a clean name. There was just this, a doorway, and a woman in it, and the smell of red beans and andouille coming from the kitchen behind her. "Come inside," Renata said. Shaq came inside. The door closed behind him. The porch was empty. The wind chime made of old spoons moved in the March air. The brass band played on. The red beans were perfect. This was not a subjective observation. This was a fact in the way that facts are facts in New Orleans, not open to interpretation, not dependent on preference, not the kind of thing reasonable people disagree about. The red beans that Renata Josephine Thiraud made on the stove of the Ursulines Avenue kitchen on that Saturday afternoon in March 2024 were perfect. The andouille had given everything it had to the pot. The cayenne was exactly right. The bay leaf had done its quiet, essential work. The beans had gone slow and low for long enough that they had arrived at that particular consistency. Not quite liquid, not quite solid. The place between those two things that red beans reach when they have been given enough time and enough trust, and nobody rushed them. Shaq ate 2 bowls. He would have eaten a third, but he looked at the pot and made a judgment about proportions, about what was in the pot and what was reasonable for a guest who had arrived unannounced on a Saturday and been fed without being asked if he was hungry, which was the New Orleans way, and he decided 2 was the number and stayed with it. Izzy ate 2 bowls also. Renata ate 1 bowl and watched the 2 of them eat, with the expression of a woman who has cooked for other people her entire adult life and has learned to measure the success of a meal not by compliments, but by the particular focused silence that descends on a table when the food is genuinely good, and the people eating it have temporarily set aside everything else in order to give it proper attention. The table was the kitchen table, the same table where Izzy had sat at age 5 with his crayons and his red construction paper and drawn his family. The same table where Renata had sat at 20 years old and told Celestine the truth. The same table where Izzy had sat 3 weeks ago on a Sunday evening and said, "Mama, I think I need to know his name." Tables in houses like this one accumulate history the way rivers accumulate water, continuously, without effort, simply by being the place where things flow through. They talked at the table, not about the large things, not about the decision or the 22 years or the next steps or any of the structural questions that would need to be addressed in the days and weeks ahead. Those conversations were coming. There were many of them coming, and all of them would require time and honesty and the careful, unhurried attention that important things require. None of them needed to happen tonight. Tonight they talked about small things. About Xavier's season. Izzy's assessment of his team's weaknesses in the conference tournament, delivered with the matter-of-fact tactical precision of someone who thought about basketball the way engineers think about load-bearing structures. About Shaq's podcast, Izzy had listened to it, he said, without particular emphasis, as a statement of fact. The way you mention having read someone's book, about the Treme, about which Shaq asked questions, and Izzy and Renata answered in the overlapping, complementary way of people who have shared a geography for a long time and have divided the knowing of it between them without discussion. About Celestine's song. Shaq asked about it again, and Renata looked at Izzy, and Izzy hummed a few bars, quietly, not performing it, just producing it from wherever he had stored it. And the kitchen was quiet for a moment after, the 3 of them sitting with the melody that had traveled from a very old woman through a hurricane night and a very young child and arrived here, at this table, decades later, still intact. She would have loved this, Renata said. She did not specify which she. She did not need to. Both of them knew, Izzy from 21 years of hearing about Celestine and Marguerite and the generations of this house, and Shaq from the afternoon on the porch, from the shoebox and the story, and the way Renata said the names of her dead, with the specific warmth, reserved for people who shaped you fundamentally, and are gone now but not gone in the way that absence is usually gone. She would have had something to say about the hands, Izzy said. Renata looked at him. Celestine had something to say about everything, she said. She would have looked at his hands and then looked at mine, Izzy said. And she would have said something in French Creole that we would only half understand. And then she would have nodded like she'd known all along. Renata was quiet for a moment. She did know, she said softly. She knew before I told her. She was 86 years old, and she had seen enough of life that she could look at a 20-year-old girl sitting at her kitchen table and know everything important about the situation without being told. She looked at her hands. She was never surprised by anything. I used to think it was wisdom. Now I think it was just mileage. Shaq listened to this. He was good at listening, which surprised people sometimes. They expected him to fill rooms with sound, which he could do and often did. But the same man who could fill a room with sound could also go completely quiet and receive what was being said to him with a completeness that his public persona did not always suggest. He had learned this quality from his mother. Lucille O'Neill listened before she spoke. She had taught him that listening was not waiting for your turn. It was something active, something you did with your full self. He was doing it now. He was learning the texture of this family in real time. Its language, its reference points, its dead, its humor, the way its two living members moved around each other in a kitchen with the practiced ease of people who have shared a space for a long time and know each other's rhythms without discussion. He was taking notes in the way that people take notes when there is no paper, storing things, filing them, placing them in the part of himself that would return to them later. He had a lot to learn. He knew this completely and without self-pity. 21 years of a person's life was an enormous amount of material, and he had arrived at it in a single afternoon, and the work of genuinely knowing it. Not the headlines of it, but the actual texture, the Celestine's song of it, the legal pad notes of it, the 37 out of 40 free throws of it, was work that would take years. He intended to do the work. He left the house at 6 o'clock, not because anyone suggested he leave, not because the conversation had run dry or the evening had become uncomfortable. He left because he was a man who understood rhythm, who had spent a career understanding when a moment had reached its natural completion, when the next right thing was to step back and let what had happened settle before adding more to it. Today had been enough, more than enough. It had been one of the most significant days of his life, and he had been in it fully, and now it needed to be what it was, without him adding to it, simply because he was reluctant to go. He stood at the iron gate. Izzy was on the porch steps. Renata was in the doorway, the same doorway where she had said, "Come inside" 3 hours ago, and changed, in 2 words, the shape of the afternoon. "I'll call," Shaq said. He said it to Izzy first, then to Renata. "Both of you." Izzy nodded. "The Zaragoza scout is coming back next month," he said. It was not a request. It was information being offered, deliberately, to a man who had made a call and who deserved to know what the call had set in motion. "I know," Shaq said. "I'll be in touch with him before then." Another nod. Shaq looked at Renata. There was no clean word for what passed between them in that look. It was not romantic. She had been clear about that, and he understood it completely, and agreed with it completely. What they had been was real, and what it had produced was standing on the porch steps in a Xavier warm-up jacket with large hands and a free throw hitch, and that was the full and correct accounting of it. What the look contained was something else, something that did not have a name in any language Shaq knew, but that existed nonetheless, solid and true. The recognition between two people who made something together a long time ago without fully understanding what they were making, and who have arrived, after a very long and separate journey, at the thing they made, and who stand on either side of it in the March evening light, and understand, both of them, completely, that it was worth it. Every year of it. Every single one. "Thank you," Shaq said. "For today. For..." He stopped, started again. "For doing it the way you did it." Renata looked at him for a moment. "Go home, Shaq," she said. Gently, completely. He went. He called his mother from the car, not from Ursulines Avenue. He drove first, through the Tremé and onto St. Claude and toward the highway, the city moving past the windows in the Saturday evening light, the streetcars on their routes, and the restaurants filling up, and the particular quality of New Orleans at 6 on a Saturday that was like no other city at no other hour, a hum that was below sound, a frequency the city ran on that you felt in the chest. If you had ever lived here, or loved someone who lived here, or left a part of yourself here, when you were 20 years old and did not know yet what you were leaving. He called Lucille when he reached the highway. She answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. It was 6:18 p.m., and it was not Tuesday or Thursday, which were the days he always called, and Lucille O'Neill noted this without saying anything about it. "Hey, baby," she said. "Hey, Mama," he said. He drove for a moment without speaking. The highway opened up ahead of him, flat and straight, the Louisiana landscape spreading out to both sides, the sky enormous, and beginning to turn at its edges with the slow, extravagant color that Louisiana sunsets have. The pinks and oranges that have no equivalent anywhere he has been in the world. The particular atmosphere of this particular latitude doing something to light that no other latitude does in quite the same way. "You okay?" Lucille said. He thought about the question. He thought about a shoebox with soft corners, about a pressed yellow flower that had gone the color of old paper, about 4 crayon figures on red construction paper and block letters that said, "My family," and a 5-year-old who had left room for the tall one, about a kitchen table and 2 bowls of red beans, and a melody that had survived a hurricane inside a very young child who was now 6 feet 9 and shot 37 out of 40 from the free throw line, and had his father's hands and his mother's patience, and his own particular intelligence that belonged to nobody but himself. About an iron gate on Ursulines Avenue. About a woman in a doorway saying, "Come inside." "Yeah, Mama," he said. "I'm okay." He paused. "I have something to tell you." The story did not end there. Real stories never end where the telling of them stops. They keep going, forward, into the days and weeks and months that come after the significant Saturday, into the ordinary time that surrounds and contains every significant moment and gives it its true shape. The ordinary time is where the real work happens, where the phone calls happen, where the learning happens, where the 21 years of missing material gets filled in, slowly, imperfectly, one conversation at a time. Shaq called Izzy on the following Monday. They talked for 45 minutes about the Zaragoza Scout and the Liga ACB, and the differences between playing in Spain versus France versus Greece, which Shaq knew with the first-hand specificity of a man who had played with and against players from all of those leagues for 19 years and had maintained relationships with people inside European basketball that were now, it turned out, useful in ways he had not anticipated. He called on Wednesday. They talked for 20 minutes about the free throw hitch. Shaq described the mechanical adjustment he had never quite successfully made himself, and suggested a drill that his shooting coach in Orlando in 1993 had given him, had he known it, at approximately the same time that Renata Josephine Thoreau was sitting at a kitchen table on Ursulines Avenue telling Celestine the truth. He called on Friday. Izzy called first, actually. He had a question about film study, about a specific defensive tendency he had noticed in the Zaragoza tape and wanted a second opinion on. He called Shaq because Shaq had spent 19 years at the highest level of professional basketball and was available and had offered to be there. He called because Shaq had come when the area code was 504. He called because Shaq had made the call before he knew for certain. He called because "okay" was the word he used when he had found solid ground and was standing on it and was ready to go forward from there. And Shaq answered on the first ring, every time. The scout from Zaragoza came back in April. He sat in the same second-row seat at Xavier University of Louisiana and watched Isidore Tremaine Turod play 34 minutes against a conference opponent and score 19 points and pull down 11 rebounds and dish 7 assists and shoot 4 for 4 from the free throw line. 4 for 4. The hitch was gone, or not gone exactly, corrected, which is a different thing. The technical adjustment made and held through repetition and the particular focused discipline of a young man who decides something is going to be fixed and then fixes it, because that is how he approaches gaps. The Zaragoza scout wrote something on his tablet. He wrote it twice, which is what scouts do when they want to make sure they are not imagining something. In the stands, 6 rows behind the scout, in a seat that cost $14, and that was designed for a person approximately half his size. Shaquille O'Neal watched his son play basketball for the first time. He did not make himself known. He wore a cap pulled low and a jacket with the collar up, and he sat in the way large people sit when they are trying not to be the thing that gets noticed. Compressed, deliberate, as quiet as it is possible for him to be, which was not completely quiet, but was quiet enough for a Friday night college gymnasium in New Orleans, where most of the attention was, correctly, on the court. He watched Izzy move. He watched the court vision. The way Izzy's eyes moved to the open man before the pass was obvious to anyone else. The way he processed the geometry of 5-on-5 basketball with the speed of someone who had been thinking about it his whole life and had arrived at an understanding of it that was intuitive now rather than calculated. He watched the patience, the way Izzy waited inside a play for the right moment, rather than forcing his own timeline onto it. He watched the hands receive the ball, palm it, make it belong to him in the specific way that specific hands make a basketball belong to them. He watched him shoot a free throw in the fourth quarter, the game close, the gym loud with the particular Friday night noise of people who needed the home team to make this shot. Izzy stood at the line. He bounced the ball 3 times. He took the breath. He released. Clean. The ball dropped through the net without touching the rim. The gym made its sound of relief and approval. Izzy moved back to position without acknowledgement, without celebration, without any external expression of the internal satisfaction of a person who has fixed a thing that needed fixing. 6 rows back, Shaq watched this and felt something pass through him that was enormous and quiet and entirely private. He did not move. He did not stand. He sat in his $14 seat with his cap pulled low, and he felt it. The full weight of this moment, this gymnasium, this game, this young man on this court, without trying to make it smaller or more manageable or more expressible than it actually was. He let it be as large as it was. It was very large. Xavier won by 8. After the game, in the parking lot outside the gymnasium, Izzy found Shaq standing by a rental car. He had texted, "I know you were there. 3rd row from the top, section B. Your cap doesn't work as well as you think it does." Shaq had texted back, 6 rows back, section B. And the cap works fine. Izzy had texted, "Coach Arsenault saw you in the 2nd quarter." Shaq had texted, "Tell Coach Arsenault I said the zone defense in the 3rd quarter needed work." There was a pause of approximately 90 seconds. Then, he says, "Tell Shaq the zone defense in the 3rd quarter is none of his business." Shaq was still laughing when Izzy came through the parking lot door with his gym bag on his shoulder and his hair needing a trim, which it always needed, which Renata noted every time she saw him and which he addressed on his own schedule rather than hers, which was one of the small ongoing negotiations of their relationship. He came across the parking lot, and he stopped in front of Shaq. They stood there for a moment in the parking lot of Xavier University of Louisiana. The father, 52 years old, the son, 21. Both of them large. Both of them carrying the particular quality of people who find the world slightly undersized and have organized their lives around this fact with varying degrees of grace. 4 for 4, Shaq said. 4 for 4, Izzy confirmed. The hitch is gone. The hitch is gone. Shaq looked at him. You fixed it in 3 weeks. I said I would fix it. I know you did. He paused. I know. Izzy shifted his gym bag. He looked at the rental car. He looked at Shaq. Mama made red beans again tonight, he said. She said if you were going to be in New Orleans, you should come for dinner. He paused. She said she was not inviting you. She was stating a fact about what was available. Shaq absorbed the distinction carefully. That's an important difference, he said. That's exactly what I said, Izzy said. They stood in the parking lot for one more moment. The gym lights behind them, the New Orleans night around them, the city doing what it does at 10 on a Friday, which was humming at a frequency below sound, in the specific way of a place that has been alive for 300 years and intends to keep going. Then Izzy started walking toward the car. He did not look back to check if Shaq was following. He did not need to. Months later, late September 2024, on a Tuesday morning, which was the day things had started, Shaq sat in his Atlanta studio for the first time since March with a podcast to record, and a meeting at 1 p.m. and a protein shake that was already going cold on his desk. Normal things. Big man, normal Tuesday. Except that on his phone, in the text chain with the contact saved as Izzy, there was a message from 40 minutes ago. First practice with Zaragoza today. Gym smells exactly the same as every other gym I've ever been in. And below it, the drill worked beat away. Coach here already noticed the release point. Day 1. And below that, sent 2 minutes after the second message, a photograph. A basketball court in Zaragoza, Spain. Early morning, before the other players had arrived. The gym empty and lit with the particular light of early September in Aragon. And in the center of the court, barely visible from the angle of the shot, a pair of shoes. Large shoes. Size 19. The same size Shaq had worn his whole career. It found after 2 weeks of searching in every specialty sports retailer in the Zaragoza metropolitan area, because size 19 basketball shoes in Spain were, it turned out, not something anyone had specifically planned for. Below the photograph, one word. Here. Shaq looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he picked up his protein shake. He took a drink. It was cold, as protein shakes always were, as this particular protein shake always would be, because he was always going to get distracted before he remembered to drink it. He set it back down. He opened the text chain. He typed 2 words. I know. He sent it. He put the phone face down on the desk. He looked at the studio ceiling, the soundproof tiles, the mounted microphone, the good speakers, the room that was built for his voice, which was large and had filled arenas from Orlando to Los Angeles to Miami and everywhere between and beyond, which had been recorded and broadcast and listened to by millions of people across 30 years of being one of the most public human beings on the surface of the earth. The room was quiet. He thought about a kitchen table on Ursulines Avenue, about red beans going slow on a low flame, about a wind chime made of old spoons, about a question asked at a crawfish boil in April 1991, "Are you ever lonely in crowds?" And the answer he had given, which was, yeah, a lot, which was true then, and was less true now than it had been for a very long time. He thought about what it meant to have the full picture of yourself, not the famous picture, not the one that 400 million people knew, the championships and the commercials and the rap albums and the TNT chair and all of it, enormous and loud and completely documented. The other picture, the one that had been incomplete without him knowing it was incomplete, missing a piece that had been sitting in a house on Ursulines Avenue for 22 years inside a Nike shoebox with a rubber band around it, waiting. The picture was complete now. He sat with the completeness of it. Then he put his headphones on. He pulled the microphone toward him. He said, to no one in particular, and to everyone who would eventually listen, "All right, let's go." In the interview that came out in November 2024, on his own podcast, the one he had canceled in March to book a flight to New Orleans. Interviewer asked him the question that people had been asking athletes and celebrities and public figures since the beginning of public life. What is the most important thing that has ever happened to you? Shaq had answered this question before, many times. The answers had varied. The championship, his mother's love, the doctorate, the work ethic his stepfather Philip Harrison had drilled into him in the early mornings, when Shaq wanted to sleep and Philip would not allow it. The answers were all true. They were all real parts of the real answer. This time he was quiet for a moment. The interviewer waited. She was a good interviewer. She knew that the pause was not dead air. It was the sound of a person locating the true thing. The most important thing, Shaq said, happened in New Orleans. This year, on a Saturday. She waited. A conversation on a porch, he said. He smiled. Not the famous smile, not the one that had sold sneakers and filled arenas and been photographed from every angle for 30 years. A different smile, smaller, private in the way that real things are private, visible but not performed. What was the conversation about? She asked. He looked at the camera for a moment. Then, family. He did not explain further. She knew enough, she was a good interviewer, to understand that the explanation was not coming, that this was the full answer, that some things a person says completely by saying them simply and then stops. She moved to the next question. Shaq stayed with the word for another half-second before he followed her there. Family. The 4 figures on the red construction paper. My family. The tall one, and the room she had left for him. On Ursulines Avenue, in the Treme, on a Thursday evening in November 2024, Renata Josephine Thureau taught her line dancing class at the community center on N Rampart Street. 23 students, a mix of ages. The Thursday class always was. Teenagers and middle-aged women, and 3 older gentlemen who had been coming since the class started and whose footwork had improved significantly over the years, though Renata would be the first to tell you they still rushed the turn on the 4 count. She called the steps in the particular voice she used for the class. Clear, rhythmic, the voice you use when you need 23 people to move together, which is different from every other kind of voice. Her phone was in her bag. After the class, when the students had filtered out into the November evening and she was folding the chairs and putting them against the wall, she checked it. There was a text from a Spain area code. Practice ran late. Coach says my footwork is the best on the team. I told him it was the Thursday line dancing jeans. She read it twice. She put the phone back in her bag. She picked up 2 more chairs. She was smiling. Not the contained, careful smile of a woman who has been managing a complicated situation with grace and precision for 22 years. A different smile. The original one. The one from before the complicated situation. The one she had been wearing in April 1991 at a crawfish boil in this neighborhood when she was 18 years old arguing about cayenne pepper with her cousin Percival, and a very large stranger had walked over and taken her side of the argument without being asked. The smile that had started everything, still there, still exactly that. Outside the community center on N Rampart Street, the Treme was doing what the Treme does on a Thursday evening in November. A brass band on the corner of St. Claude, because there is always a brass band on some corner at some hour. The live oaks dropping their leaves in the particular unhurried way of trees that have been doing this for a very long time and intend to keep doing it. The houses in their colors, terracotta and yellow and blue and green, the colors of a neighborhood that decided what it was a long time ago and has not reconsidered, and somewhere in all of it, barely audible above the brass band and the November wind and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Thursday evening, a wind chime made of old spoons, moving, steady, holding its note. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, drop where you are listening from right now in the comments below. It always amazes me how people from all around the world come together over one simple human story. Whether you are in New York or Nigeria, London or Louisiana, let us know you are here. And if this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about love differently, or sacrifice, or what it really means to protect someone you care about, please hit that like button right now. It only takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach somebody out there who really needs to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. We are here every week with stories that remind us what it means to be human. Real stories. Real emotions. The kind that stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss one. Every single subscriber helps us spread a little more kindness in a world that could always use more of it. And do not go anywhere just yet. The video appearing on your screen right now is one you are going to want to watch next. Trust me on that one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being the kind of person who still believes that the most powerful stories are the ones about ordinary people doing quietly extraordinary things. Now go click that video. We will see you there.